my mother-in-law and husband. What exactly do you mean by it happens all the time? A daughter-in-law who can't give her mother-in-law grandchildren would have to be a slave, wouldn't she? My mother-in-law responded casually while chewing on the hamburger steak I had made. That's right. Ruby is our slave. She stays in the kitchen to take care of us while we eat, my husband chimed in, echoing his mother's sentiment. As expected, he continued, he took me to his mother's every weekend to help her with housework, even though you couldn't give her grandchildren. I'm letting you stay here. You should appreciate her and do the best you can for my mom. I didn't want to go to my in-laws' house, but I had made a commitment. Even if I refused to go, my husband would verbally force me. He knows I have a short temper and difficulty finding my words. Mom, I brought a slave. He even greeted me that way recently. What are you talking about? My father-in-law seemed offended by the way my mother-in-law and husband referred to me as a slave. That's not how a normal family with children behaves. Ruby, it's not your fault. You should stop bullying her. What do you mean? You're the one that lives so far away, so stay out of the problem, my husband snapped back. That's right, Dad. Don't tell me what to do. You didn't have to watch Mom lose the possibility of having grandchildren, my mother-in-law added, with a tone that sounded like they were mocking my father-in-law. I tossed the coffee beans in the grinder while listening to their conversation. My mother-in-law and husband always ordered me to bring them coffee as soon as they finished eating. I was so busy with shopping for my mother-in-law that I only had time to eat a piece of sweetbread earlier. Come on, I'm hungry too. I'm not sure what I'm doing, I muttered to myself as if escaping from the grinder's blade. A single coffee bean fell to the floor. My name is Ruby and I'm a 37-year-old housewife. During the weekday lunch hours, I work part-time in the kitchen of a family restaurant. My husband and I rent an apartment. I used to work at the same local bank as my husband, but I left 3 years ago to focus on fertility treatment. We were unable to have children, so we sought medical attention and were told that the problem was on my side. After a year of treatment, I was told that it is impossible for me to get pregnant. My mother-in-law and husband changed shortly after that. Originally, we were both working and managing our own income and budgets. When I decided to leave my job, my husband took on the responsibility of covering our living expenses. He managed our savings, paid the bills for rent and insurance, and started giving me a monthly allowance. At first, we were able to live comfortably on $1,000 a month. However, when we stopped pursuing fertility treatments, my husband suggested we could save money. Since we don't have fertility treatments anymore, you can save money, were his first words after we made the decision to stop trying to conceive. Because of the financial burden of the treatment, I've been giving you more money for living expenses, but you don't need it anymore. You can go back to work if you want, he'd added. True to his word, he gradually reduced the amount he gave me, first $800, then $600, and eventually $500 a month. There was a time when I desperately tried to find work, but even then, my mother-in-law interfered. Working as a full-time employee is not good for a wife, she asserted. If you don't share the housework, she will divorce you. So, you're saying I shouldn't work? I questioned. Of course, if it's only part-time, then fine. You need to devote yourself to Carl and serve me. You can't even have grandchildren, so it's the least you can do, she replied. Despite enduring painful treatments, I couldn't conceive. My mother-in-law's attitude towards me changed drastically. She'd call me frequently, asking me to run errands, and I worked every weekend at their house. No matter what I did, she found fault and complained incessantly. Why are you folding laundry like that? Why not put the corners together and fold it correctly and neatly? Do it again, she'd scold, even throwing the laundry onto the floor once. It seemed like she relished in hurting me. One evening after dinner, my father-in-law noticed my distress and offered to take me out for a drink. I'm going out for a drink. Do you want to join me? He asked, showing concern for my well-being. His kindness touched me deeply, and I couldn't help but cry. I saw that, and if you want, you can vent to me, he reassured. He took me to a local bar where we sat across from each other, sharing a beer and a whiskey soda. As we ordered mixed nuts and a salad, his compassionate presence was a welcome relief from the turmoil at home. I could tell Elizabeth and Carl were being rude to you, my father-in-law began, taking a sip of beer. He listened attentively as I poured out my grievances about how his wife and son had treated me since I stopped fertility treatments. I'm blamed for not being able to have children and am forced to run errands, I confided. My husband wouldn't let me work full-time, and he's reduced my living expenses since we stopped the treatments. Now, he only gives me $500 a month. What I hate most is being called a slave, I continued. Elizabeth is not happy unless she gets her way. She wasn't like this before, but she became selfish after having Carl. She would yell at me so much that I began to dislike her, and now we pretend to be a happy couple. Do you think it's because he doesn't want to be with me? I'm jealous my father-in-law has a place to escape to, I admitted. You're not tough enough to make yourself heard, he observed. Yeah, but venting to you makes me feel better, I admitted gratefully. Good, that makes me happy, he said before we had one more beer and one more whiskey soda before leaving the restaurant. However, as soon as we arrived back home, the situation escalated. I'm back, I announced as I opened the door, only to find my mother-in-law and husband standing there. Dad, did you have a night out with my wife? My husband questioned, eyeing both of us. What? I just invited Ruby for a drink, my father-in-law clarified. What kind of relationship is this that you can go out for drinks together? My mother-in-law interjected angrily. Just like your husband said, I retorted, feeling the tension mounting. What are you thinking, Ruby? Isn't it wrong for a wife to go to a bar with a man? You can't give me grandchildren, but you still have desires, my husband accused, joining in the finger-pointing. Enough. A powerful voice echoed as if thunder had struck. My father-in-law was enraged, staring down Carl and Elizabeth. What is it with you? All I wanted was for Ruby to relax, he thundered, his anger palpable. The rage sped up my heart rate. I thought, noting the intensity of the moment, mild men or people can become more difficult to deal with when injured. I mused, watching Elizabeth shudder at her name being called. Was she scared of him, or did she have something to hide? You said what kind of relationship do you have with your father-in-law that you go out drinking together? My husband challenged. That's my daughter-in-law is treated like a slave, and I took her to get her mind off it. That's what happened because of Ruby, my father-in-law clarified, cutting through the tension with his explanation. I can't have grandchildren, my mother-in-law's accusation hung in the air, a barb aimed directly at me. The words ignited a desire to yell, to defend myself against her constant blame for not providing her with grandkids. How can you say that when you hate children? I wanted to retort, but I bit my tongue. Yet even in my silence, I couldn't shake the urge to challenge her unfair judgment. Well, grandchildren are different than other children, aren't they? I finally spoke up, my voice edged with frustration. That said, I don't think you wanted grandchildren enough to treat Ruby like this. You're just making an excuse to point the finger at her. My mother-in-law seemed about to respond, but then she abruptly averted her gaze. Was she tongue-tied or perhaps fearful of her husband's reaction? Carl, wait, my attention shifted to my husband. I heard you only give Ruby $500 a month for living expenses. Do you keep the rest of your salary? I probed, unable to ignore the discrepancy. No, I pay rent and insurance, he countered, but his evasive response left room for doubt. As the silence stretched, he seemed unable to conjure a convincing explanation. I came here to discuss our future. Let's get right to it, my father-in-law intervened, leading us to the living room. What do you mean discuss our future? Just sit down, my mother-in-law commanded, her tone imperious. Make some coffee first, Ruby, she ordered, her words laced with condescension, but my father-in-law's sharp rebuke cut through the air. Don't tell her what to do. I complied silently, sensing the tension crackling around me. As the coffee brewed, my father-in-law resumed speaking, his tone authoritative. I'll be retired in a few years after my current assignment ends. I won't be living with you anymore. The revelation left my husband and mother-in-law stunned. What do you mean? They both protested in unison. We've been masquerading as a couple for years, so we no longer need to live together, my father-in-law explained calmly. I'll live where I want, and you can stay here. But my mother-in-law's panic was palpable. That's fine, but I changed my mind after you accused me of being unfaithful earlier, she protested, rising from her seat. I'm selling the house, Elizabeth. I'll leave you nowhere to live. Her announcement sent shockwaves through the room. Why don't you just get a place to live? My father-in-law suggested, but her response was desperate. How am I going to do that? I can't pay the rent. Get Carl to help you, my father-in-law suggested, unaware of the financial strain. He only gives her $500 a month. I'm sure he can pay for you. But my husband's nervousness betrayed him as he struggled to respond. That's not possible, he stammered, his discomfort evident. We don't have any money. If I do that, I won't be able to pay Mom's debt. The revelation hung in the air, casting a shadow over the room. You just mentioned debt, didn't you? My father-in-law's tone turned grave. Explain. I didn't mean what I said. I said explain. My father-in-law's voice thundered through the room, his anger palpable. My mother-in-law dissolved into tears at the sound of his fury, but his rage remained unabated. Mom owes me $50,000. I'm her co-signer, my husband confessed, his expression resigned. Around the time we stopped fertility treatment, Mom made an investment. She made some money at first, but then the stock market crashed, he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. You mean you lost money in the stock market and went into debt? I interjected, incredulous at the revelation. I used family funds. At the time, we were betting on stocks that were supposed to go up, but eventually we ended up in debt. Now, I'm paying it with my salary and Mom's repaying it by working part-time at a supermarket, my husband explained, his tone heavy with the weight of their financial burden. The news caught me off guard. I had never heard anything about stocks or debt. My mother-in-law had lost a significant amount of money in the stock market and had borrowed to compensate for it when I stopped fertility treatment. She must have tried to repay the debt by investing in stocks that were expected to rise. But as they struggled with repayment, those stocks failed to yield returns. Maybe, I couldn't help but voice my thoughts. That's also when you and Carl began treating me like a slave. Ruby, what are you trying to say? Were you just taking it out on me? My mother-in-law challenged, her voice strained. The slave treatment started around the time I stopped fertility treatments. I doubt it's because she wanted a grandchild so badly. But the simple answer is that she was taking it out on me because that was satisfying, I countered, the bitterness evident in my tone. As expected, my mother-in-law remained silent, her guilt hanging heavy in the air. And Carl used the money that he took out of my monthly expenses to pay off his debts. He could save money because there's no fertility treatment. He didn't give me less money for some strange, unknown reason. He just needed the money to repay his mom's debt, I concluded, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. You stupid idiot. Finally, my father-in-law erupted, his frustration boiling over. Even if it's family money, it's money. I worked for and saved for you, only for you to invest it in stocks without consulting me. To top it all off, you lost it all. What the hell kind of money are you spending? My father-in-law exploded, his frustration boiling over. With those words, he abruptly left the room, as if struck by a sudden realization. We all followed him, wondering what he was up to. What are you doing? My husband questioned as we trailed behind him. Show me Elizabeth's stuff. I'll check what she's buying, my father-in-law demanded, his tone sharp. Stop, Elizabeth cried, her voice tinged with panic, but her husband paid her no heed. He swung open the closet door, revealing a trove of luxury handbags. Rudy, are these bags expensive? They're all luxury items costing over $1,000, my father-in-law remarked, his tone incredulous. As he opened a small drawer in the corner of the closet, an array of accessories greeted our eyes, rings, necklaces, and earrings, some adorned with diamonds, rubies, and other precious stones. Picking up a ring, I noticed the engraving indicating it was made of 18-karat gold. Elizabeth, you bought all these expensive things without telling me? My father-in-law's disappointment was palpable. I'm sorry, but Elizabeth began, but her husband cut her off with a look of disgust. All this spending, investing in stocks without my permission, and treating Ruby like a slave. Divorce. I want a divorce and I won't take no for an answer, he declared, his voice resolute. But how am I supposed to live? Elizabeth protested, her voice trembling. Talk to Carl. I'll sell this house and land immediately. You can sell these bags and jewelry to pay for the move, my father-in-law retorted, leaving Elizabeth speechless. My husband, no longer wearing his arrogant demeanor, nodded silently, his gaze averted. The next day, my father-in-law presented 2 sets of divorce papers. Here, Ruby. If you want to file for divorce too, he offered, handing one to me. I glanced at my husband, who sighed and turned away. Of course, I wanted a divorce, but more importantly, we wanted alimony from these people. That night, as I lay awake, I pondered the events of the past years. How long had I suffered in silence? What did I want now? I had once yearned for a child. enduring agonizing fertility treatments, only to realize I couldn't conceive. I continued my story, holding back the tears welling in my eyes. All the painful tests and treatments I endured in hopes of becoming a mother seemed futile now. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't have a baby. As I grieved, Carl informed me that since I no longer needed fertility treatment, he would reduce my living expenses. "What are you saying? This is all Carl's fault," Elizabeth interjected, her voice sharp. My father-in-law's horror was palpable, and my mother-in-law fell silent, her accusations hanging in the air. She had blamed me for not giving her a grandchild and then treated me like a slave. "Do you know how hard it was for me?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. Naturally, there was no response from Elizabeth or Carl. In the end, Carl's actions were driven by his need to pay off debts, while Elizabeth sought an outlet for the stress of financial losses in the stock market. "I want you to reimburse me for this," I declared, my voice firm. "What if I say I won't pay?" Carl retorted defiantly. "Sure, I'll talk to my lawyer," I shot back, my resolve unwavering. After the new year, my father-in-law officially divorced my mother-in-law. Within days of putting his house on the market, he found a buyer who intended to tear down the old house and clear the land to build a new one. Left with nowhere to stay, my mother-in-law moved into a rundown apartment, barely holding together. She now resides with my ex-husband, struggling to make ends meet while paying off their debts and alimony to me, a financial burden I'm sure weighs heavily on them. Meanwhile, I found solace in a beautiful little apartment and secured a clerical job at a security company, thanks to my father-in-law's support. He encouraged me to utilize my accounting knowledge and skills from working at a bank. "I want you to be happy. If you ever need help, just tell me anything," he reassured me, his unwavering support a beacon of hope. With my father-in-law by my side, I embarked on this new chapter, determined to shine on my own. As I dressed for my first day of work, I made a promise to myself to embrace this fresh start and forge my path to happiness.
I've always found solace in the quiet aisles of bookstores, the kind where time seems to have its own rhythm and stories leap from tattered pages. At 29, running a business that my parents helped me set up, I often escape to these havens, seeking the company of books over people. That day at Dusty Pages, a little haven tucked away in the city's heart, was no different. Or so I thought. As I wandered through the maze of shelves, my fingers traced the spines of countless books, each holding a universe within. My quest was specific, a rare, antique edition that had eluded me for months. And there it was, almost glowing amidst the dust and shadows. As I reached out, another hand mirrored mine, halting inches from the prize. Startled, I looked up into a pair of curious eyes. The owner of the hand was a man about my age, with a kind of easygoing charm. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said, quickly retracting his hand. "Were you going for this one?" "Yeah, I've been on its trail for ages," I replied, surprised at my own honesty. He gave a half smile, "Me too. It's a tough find. But go ahead, you found it first." His gesture, so simple yet rare, caught me off guard. "Are you sure?" "I mean, we both found it at the same time," I said, feeling a strange mix of guilt and gratitude. "Yeah, I'm sure. I'm Jake, by the way," he introduced himself, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you, Jake." "I am, well, let's just say I'm a fellow book lover," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, friendly. We both chuckled, and I took the book, feeling a twinge of victory mixed with sympathy. "You're a rare breed, Jake. Giving up a find like this." He shrugged. "Books come and go. But it's not every day you get to make someone's day." I laughed. "Well, you've certainly made mine. I'm in this place often, but I haven't seen you around." "You a regular?" "Nah, first time here. I usually stick to the tech world, but there's something about old books, you know?" I nodded, understanding all too well. We found a corner table amidst the stacks and started talking about books, life, and everything in between. He was easy to talk to, a listener with stories of his own. He was curious about my business, but I dodged the topic, not ready to delve into the whole successful businesswoman with family support narrative just yet. Hours slipped by like minutes as we talked. I learned about his tech job, his love for hiking, and his surprisingly good taste in old movies. In turn, I shared my love for antique books, my random adventures, and my guilty pleasure of bad reality TV shows. As the bookstore began to dim its lights, signaling closing time, we exchanged numbers. It was really great meeting you, Jake. Maybe we can do this again, talk more about books, or anything else, I said, feeling a connection I hadn't anticipated. Absolutely, he replied, his smile genuine. I'll hold you to that. And maybe next time, I'll find the book first. After several months of dating Jake, the inevitable happened, meeting his family. He'd warned me about them, how they were a bit, well, let's just say they had their quirks. He was especially worried about them finding out about my business and the money situation. So, I decided to play it down, saying I was a freelancer. Just a simple girl writing articles, nothing fancy. We drove to his parents' house one Sunday. It was a modest home, the kind that had seen better days. The moment we walked in, I felt the weight of their eyes sizing me up. Mom, Dad, this is... Jake started. I'm Sarah, I cut in, offering a smile that felt more like a shield. His mom, a stern-looking woman with a permanent frown, gave me a once-over. Sarah, huh? And what is it you do? I'm a freelance writer. I write articles for websites, I replied, trying to sound as humble as possible. His dad, a quiet man with a knack for disappearing into the background, just nodded. But it was Jake's sister, Linda, who spoke next. A freelancer? So, you don't have a real job? Linda's voice dripped with a mix of curiosity and disdain. I felt Jake's hand tighten around mine, a silent plea for patience. Well, it pays the bills. It's honest work, I said, keeping my tone light. Linda snorted. Sounds more like freeloading to me. Bet you're just waiting to latch onto Jake's income. Dinner was an awkward affair. His parents made small talk, asking Jake about his work, barely acknowledging my presence. Linda, on the other hand, was like a dog with a bone, dropping snide remarks every chance she got. So, Sarah, freelancing must be tough. Bet you don't get to go on fancy trips or buy nice things, Linda said, her eyes sharp. I forced a laugh. Oh, I manage. I like simple things. Jake tried to change the subject, talking about a recent project he was working on. But Linda wouldn't let up. And what about kids? Planning on any? Or would that be too much for a freelancer to handle? She pressed on. I could feel Jake's frustration growing, mirroring my own. We haven't really thought that far ahead, he said, his voice tight. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of uncomfortable exchanges and forced smiles. Things started heating up after that awkward dinner with Jake's family. It wasn't long before his mom and sister, Linda, began dropping by our place uninvited. They'd come in, plop themselves on the couch, and make themselves right at home, often staying for hours. It was like they were marking their territory, reminding me that I was the outsider. One such afternoon, while Jake was at work, his mom and Linda showed up. As usual, they made a beeline for the kitchen, expecting to be fed. I had just made some sandwiches for myself, which they took as an invitation to lunch. So, Sarah, still freelancing? Linda asked, taking a bite of the sandwich I had made for myself. I nodded, trying to keep my cool. Yep, still at it. It's going well. And how much does that bring in, if you don't mind me asking? His mom chimed in, her eyes scanning my modest living room like she was calculating my worth. I shrugged, enough to get by. I don't really discuss my finances. Linda smirked, must be nice, living off Jake while pretending to work. I clenched my jaw, feeling my patience wearing thin. Actually, I pay my own bills. Jake and I keep our finances separate. Their prying continued, but I dodged their questions, keeping my answers vague. They seemed to take pleasure in trying to undermine me, questioning my lifestyle, my job, even my relationship with Jake. Then came the family dinner at Jake's mom's place. It was supposed to be a casual get-together, but it felt more like a trial by fire. We all sat around the dining table, the air thick with unspoken tensions. Linda, who had been oddly quiet, suddenly turned to Jake. "So, brother, I was thinking, for my son's birthday, you could get him that gaming console he's been wanting. It's a bit pricey, but you can afford it, right?" Jake, who had been picking at his food, looked up, surprised. "Linda, you know I can't do that. Things are tight right now, what with the wedding and all." Linda's face turned sour. "Oh, so now that you're married, you suddenly can't spare a dime for your nephew?" Jake's frustration was evident. "It's not about that, Linda. Sarah and I have our own expenses. I can't just splurge on expensive gifts." The argument escalated, with Linda accusing me of monopolizing Jake's finances and attention. "You've changed, Jake. Ever since she came into your life, you've been stingy and distant." I could feel everyone's eyes on me, the unspoken blame hanging heavy in the air. Jake tried to defend me, but Linda wouldn't have it. She stormed out, leaving a trail of tension behind. After the blow-up at the family dinner, Jake and I decided we needed a break from all the drama. We planned a short trip to the mountains, a chance to clear our heads and get some breathing room. It was a peaceful, rejuvenating escape, just the two of us and nature. But the moment we returned, reality crashed back in, harder than ever. We barely had time to unpack when there was a furious knocking at our door. I opened it to find Linda, red-faced and fuming. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "What's going on, Linda? Why are you here?" I asked, closing the door. She whirled around, eyes blazing. "Don't play dumb, Sarah. I know what you're doing. You're bleeding Jake dry, using his money to go on fancy trips and buy expensive stuff. And now you're turning him against his own family." I was taken aback by her accusation. "Linda, that's not true. We both pay for our expenses, and this trip was planned long ago." She wasn't listening, though. "You think you're so clever, huh? Making him think he doesn't need us, that we're just after his money. But I see right through you." Jake came out of the bedroom, having heard the commotion. "Linda, what the hell? You can't just barge in here and start accusing Sarah of nonsense." She rounded on him. "Nonsense? Look at you, Jake. Ever since she came into your life, you've been different. You used to help us, be there for us. Now you're just her puppet." Jake's patience was wearing thin. "Linda, I'm not anyone's puppet. Sarah and I make our decisions together. And as for helping you, I can't keep bailing you out every time you have a financial problem." Linda's anger seemed to boil over. In a fit of rage, she swept her arm across the coffee table, sending my collection of antique books crashing to the floor. "This is what you care about now? Old, useless books and a gold digger?" I gasped, rushing to salvage my books. Jake grabbed Linda's arm, steering her towards the door. "That's enough, Linda. Leave. Now." She struggled against him. "You'll regret this, Jake. Choosing her over your own family." After she left, the apartment was eerily silent, the tension hanging thick in the air. Jake helped me pick up the books, his face a mix of anger and regret. The weeks following Linda's outburst were quiet, almost nearly so. Jake and I had started to relax a bit, thinking maybe, just maybe, his family had decided to back off. That was until we got the call from his mom about her birthday dinner at a fancy restaurant downtown. When Jake mentioned that his mother's birthday dinner would be at Le Jardin, I couldn't help but grin. I had a special connection with that place, a little secret that I hadn't shared with anyone, not even Jake. As we drove to the restaurant, I could sense Jake's anxiety. He fidgeted in his seat, clearly worried about how the evening would unfold after the recent tensions with his family. "You okay?" I asked, reaching over to give his hand a reassuring squeeze. Yeah, just hoping tonight goes smoothly, he replied, forcing a smile. Le Jardin was as elegant as ever, with its dim lighting and soft music creating an intimate ambience. Jake's family was already there, seated at a large, round table. The scene was lively, with animated conversations and laughter, but it all seemed to pause as we approached. I quickly noticed there was only one empty chair. Jake, with a hint of confusion in his voice, addressed his sister, Linda. Hey, Linda, why is there only one seat? We're both here. Linda, with a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes, said, Oh, Jake, we assumed Sarah wouldn't mind. After all, this is a family gathering, and she's not really family, is she? Maybe she can find a spot at the bar. The table erupted in a mix of awkward chuckles and murmurs. Jake's face turned a shade of red, a mixture of embarrassment and anger. I felt their eyes on me, expecting me to react, to show some sign of hurt or outrage. But instead, I laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh. That's quite all right, Linda. I wouldn't want to impose. Jake, still holding my hand, looked at me with a puzzled expression. Sarah, you sure you're okay with this? I squeezed his hand. Absolutely. Don't worry about me. I'll find a place. Enjoy the dinner. As I stepped away from the table, I could feel their eyes on me, a mix of surprise and uncertainty in their gaze. I approached the restaurant manager, a familiar face, with a confident stride. Hi, John, seems there's a bit of a mix-up at our table. Could you find a spot for me? I asked, my tone light but firm. John's professional demeanor broke into a smile of recognition. Of course, Sarah. For the owner of Le Jardin, we always have the best table available. The words were loud enough for Jake's family to hear, and I glanced back to see their expressions shift from smug satisfaction to utter shock. Linda's and her mother's mouths hung open, their plan to belittle me backfiring spectacularly. As John led me to a beautifully set table in a prime location, I couldn't help but savor the moment. The irony of the situation was delicious, and their stunned faces were a sight to behold. Sitting at my own VIP table at Le Jardin, I couldn't help but feel a mix of triumph and amusement. Jake sat across from me, his expression still a mix of shock and pride. Sarah, why didn't you tell me you own this place? He asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. I shrugged, sipping my wine. I guess I never found the right moment. And, honestly, I wanted to keep some parts of my life just for me, at least for a little while. He laughed, shaking his head. This is incredible. No wonder you weren't fazed by Linda's comment. Our meal was delightful, the food exquisite as always, but the real entertainment was the drama unfolding at the family table. Midway through our dinner, Linda and Jake's mom, with hesitant steps and awkward expressions, approached our table. Sarah, we didn't know. Jake's mom stammered, clearly struggling to find the right words. Yeah, about the restaurant, and you owning it, Linda added, her usual confidence deflated. I put down my fork, giving them a calm look. It's okay. Not many people do. I prefer to keep my business affairs private. Jake's mom fidgeted, glancing at the other table where the rest of the family was pretending not to eavesdrop. I mean, about the bill tonight. We assumed you'd. I raised an eyebrow. You assumed I'd pay because I own the place. They both nodded, visibly uncomfortable. I could tell they were expecting me to bail them out of the awkward situation they had created for themselves. I leaned back in my chair, choosing my words carefully. Well, as much as I'd love to treat everyone, I think it's important for us to stick to what was planned. It seems, someone said that I'm not a family member, right? The look on their faces was a mix of surprise and embarrassment. Linda, usually so quick to speak, was at a loss for words. They returned to their table, their departure marked by a few curious glances from the other guests. Turning back to our meal, Jake let out a low whistle. Well, that was something. I laughed, the tension from earlier completely diffused. "Just a typical dinner with your family, huh?" He nodded, his eyes still on his family's table. "You know, I'm starting to think these dinners are cursed." We finished our meal in peace, the atmosphere at our table starkly contrasting with the palpable tension at the family table. As we left the restaurant, I felt a sense of closure, like I had finally established my place in this complicated family dynamic. Their attempts to belittle me had backfired, and in revealing a part of my life I had kept private, I had gained an unexpected upper hand. The ride home from Blue Jardin was filled with a mix of silence and soft music playing in the background. Jake seemed deep in thought, occasionally glancing at me as if he was about to say something but then deciding against it. Finally, as we pulled into our driveway, he spoke up. "Sarah, I'm really sorry about tonight. My family, they can be too much." I turned off the car's engine and looked at him. "Jake, it's not your fault. But we do need to talk about this." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I know. What do you think we should do?" I took a moment before answering. "I think it's time we set some boundaries. Your family's behavior has been out of line, and tonight it was too much." Jake nodded, his expression grave. "I agree. I just never expected things to get this bad. Linda and Mom, they've always been difficult, but this..." "It's not just about Linda and your mom," I interjected. "It's about respecting our relationship, our choices. They can't keep treating me, like this." Jake reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "You're right. I'll talk to them. It's time they understand that they can't walk all over us." The following day, Jake made the call. I could hear bits and pieces of the conversation from the other room, his tone was firm, resolute. After he hung up, he came into the living room, looking somewhat relieved but also apprehensive. "I did it. I told them we need space, that their behavior is unacceptable. They didn't take it well, but I think it's for the best." I got up and gave him a hug. "Thank you, Jake. I know that wasn't easy." He hugged me back, tight. "You're worth it. I should have done this a long time ago." The weeks that followed were surprisingly peaceful. No unexpected visits, no snide remarks, no drama. It was a relief, but also a bit surreal. One evening, as we were enjoying a quiet dinner at home, Jake looked up from his plate. "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe this break from my family is a good thing. Gives us time to focus on us, on what we want." I smiled, reaching across the table to hold his hand. "I've been thinking the same thing. It's nice, isn't it? Just being us, without all the noise." He nodded, a contented smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, it really is." Cutting ties with Jake's family wasn't an easy decision, but it brought a sense of clarity and peace to our lives. It was a step towards prioritizing our happiness and well-being, a step that was long overdue. Sitting on our living room couch, Jake and I were enjoying a quiet evening. The room was filled with the soft glow of the lamp and the faint sound of a jazz record playing in the background. I couldn't help but reflect on the roller coaster of events that had unfolded in our lives recently. "Jake," I started, breaking the comfortable silence, "do you ever think about how things would have been if we had just, I don't know, given in to your family's demands?" He looked over at me, his eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes, yeah, but then I remember how unhappy we were, constantly trying to please them. I think we made the right choice." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "It's just crazy, you know? How much we've been through because of all this. Makes me wonder what's really important in life." Jake reached out and took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "What's important is this, us, being honest with each other, standing up for what we believe in." I smiled, feeling a sense of warmth spreading through me. "You're right. I guess it's all about finding a balance, isn't it? between dealing with family and staying true to ourselves. Yeah, balance, he echoed, his gaze shifting to the window. You know, before all this, I always thought family was about sticking together no matter what. But now, I realize it's more than that. It's about respect, understanding, and sometimes, distance. I leaned my head on his shoulder. I never expected my life to turn out like this. Meeting you, starting a business, dealing with all the family drama. It's been a journey. And what a journey it's been, he added with a chuckle. With its ups and downs, but I wouldn't change a thing. We sat there in silence for a while, lost in our thoughts. The challenges we had faced with his family had tested us in ways we never anticipated. But through it all, we had grown stronger, both as individuals and as a couple. That evening, as we sat together, I realized that life is unpredictable and often challenging. But with the right person by your side, it's an adventure worth every moment. Our story wasn't just about dealing with difficult in-laws or running a successful business. It was about love, resilience, and the power of standing together against the odds. Hey, you gonna just sit there all day? Mrs. Thompson's voice cut through the silence like a knife. I was in my makeshift office, a small table in the corner of the bedroom, trying to focus on my web design project. I looked up, meeting her stern gaze. Just working, Mrs. Thompson, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. She snorted, clearly unimpressed. Working? Looks like you're just playing on that computer. When I was your age, I had real chores. I sighed inwardly. This was a daily ritual. Ever since I moved into the Thompson house, after marrying Mark, her son, I'd felt like an outsider. Mark, a kind-hearted man with a constant travel schedule for work, was my rock. But with him away, the house felt cold, uninviting. Anna, Mark's sister, walked in, her 2 kids trailing behind her. "Mom, have you seen my phone charger?" she asked, ignoring me completely. "Try the living room," Mrs. Thompson suggested, still eyeing me suspiciously. I returned to my screen, trying to block out their conversation. Anna's kids, Lily and Max, ran around, their shrieks piercing the air. I loved kids, but these 2 were wild, unchecked. "Rose, can you watch the kids? I need to run an errand," Anna said, assuming more than asking. "I really need to finish this project, Anna," I replied, feeling the pressure. "It's not like you're doing anything important," she retorted, her voice tinged with condescension. I bit back a sharper retort. Mark always said to keep the peace. But it was hard, especially with Anna treating me like a free babysitter and her mother questioning my every move. The door opened, and Mark stepped in, a brief respite in my day. "Hey, love," he greeted, wrapping his arms around me. "Hey," I smiled, feeling a momentary relief. "How's everyone?" he asked, looking around. "Just the usual," I replied, glancing at his mother and sister. Mrs. Thompson interjected, "Mark, tell your wife to help more around here. She's always on that computer." Mark looked at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, Rose works hard. Her job is just as valid as any other." Anna rolled her eyes. "Sure, if you call sitting all day work. Mark sighed. "Anna, let's not start this again." I appreciated Mark's support, but I could tell he was tired of playing mediator. As he left to unpack, Mrs. Thompson gave me a look that could curdle milk. "Remember, Rose, this is my house. You follow my rules," she said sharply. I nodded, feeling the familiar knot of frustration in my stomach. I was an orphan, with no family to turn to. This was my home now, but it didn't feel like it. As I turned back to my computer, I promised myself that things would change. Mark and I were saving for our own place. A home where respect and kindness weren't foreign concepts. A place where I could work in peace, love openly, and be myself. The house was buzzing with noise, but I felt more alone than ever. Mark had just left for another one of his work trips, and the emptiness he left behind was tangible. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix myself some toast, when Mrs. Thompson barged in. "Can't you make something more useful? You're always eating bread. No wonder you're so skinny," she remarked, her tone dripping with disdain. "Just not very hungry, Mrs. Thompson," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "You'd be hungry if you did some real work around here," she shot back, rummaging through the fridge. I sighed and left the kitchen with my toast. Eating in my room seemed like a better option than enduring another round of criticism. Later, as I tried to concentrate on my work, Anna's voice echoed from the hallway. "Rose, can you watch the kids again? I've got to run out." "Anna, I really need to get this work done. It's important," I responded, feeling the frustration build up. "Oh, come on, it's just clicking around on a computer. How hard can it be?" Anna retorted, her voice laced with sarcasm. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to argue. It was easier to agree than to start another fight. "Fine, I'll watch them," I conceded. As I tried to manage Lily and Max, who were more interested in playing tag around my workspace, I realized how isolated I felt in this house. Surrounded by people, yet so alone. That night, I heard Anna and Mrs. Thompson talking in the living room. "She's not right for Mark. Just sits in her room all day, doing God knows what on that computer." Mrs. Thompson's voice was sharp and clear. "Yeah, and have you noticed how she never joins us for meals anymore? As if she's too good for us," Anna added, her words like daggers. I lay in bed, their words stinging. I missed Mark's presence, his understanding. He was the buffer between me and their constant judgment. Without him, it felt like I was an easy target. The next day, as I made myself another solitary meal, Mrs. Thompson walked in. "You know, if you spent more time with us, maybe you'd feel more part of the family," she said, her tone accusatory. I looked at her, feeling the irony of her words. "I try, Mrs. Thompson, but it's hard when I feel like everything I do is wrong in your eyes," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She just huffed and walked out, leaving me alone again. I realized then that no matter how much I tried, I would always be an outsider in this house. My presence was tolerated, not welcomed. And with Mark away, the thin veneer of family harmony was quickly unraveling. The day started like any other, but it turned into the worst day of my life. I was in my room, headphones on, when Anna barged in without knocking. "Your phone's been ringing off the hook," she said, her voice unusually somber. I pulled off my headphones, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Who is it?" I asked, reaching for my phone. "It's Mark's company," she replied, avoiding my gaze. My hands trembled as I answered the call. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words were like a sledgehammer. "There's been an accident. Mark's plane. I'm so sorry." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. My whole world collapsed in that moment. Mark, my husband, my best friend, gone. I don't remember much after that. I vaguely recall Mrs. Thompson and Anna in the living room, their voices a distant echo. "Did you hear about Mark?" Mrs. Thompson's voice was flat, almost emotionless. "Yeah, what a shame. But you know, with his job, it was always a risk," Anna replied, her tone too casual for the gravity of the situation. Their words felt like a betrayal. Where was the grief? The loss? It was as if Mark was just an inconvenience removed from their lives. In the days that followed, I was a ghost in the house, barely eating, barely existing. Mark's funeral was a blur. I remember standing there, feeling the weight of my loneliness, surrounded by people who were supposed to be family. But a new shock awaited me. Amidst my sorrow, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a confusing mix of joy and heartache. A part of Mark was still with me, yet he'd never know. After the funeral, Mrs. Thompson's true colors shone brighter than ever. "Rose, we need to talk about the house," she said, her voice cold and calculating. I looked at her, not comprehending. "What about the house?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You can't stay here anymore. Now that Mark's gone, there's no reason for you to be here, she stated bluntly. I felt the room spin. But this was my home with Mark, I protested weakly. Was. Past tense. You need to find somewhere else to live, she said, her eyes void of any sympathy. Anna chimed in. Yeah, Rose, it's time to move on. You don't really belong here anyway. I need to tell you something, I began, my voice shaky. I'm pregnant. Mark was going to be a father. Their reaction was nothing like I expected. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. Pregnant? That's convenient. Trying to find a reason to stay here, are you? Anna joined in. Yeah, right. As if we'd believe that. You just don't want to leave. I stood there, stunned. Their words stung more than I could express. It's true, I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper, but they just laughed it off. I packed my bags in a daze, each item a reminder of the life I had lost. As I was about to leave, I turned to them. You're kicking me out at the worst time of my life. How can you be so cruel? Mrs. Thompson looked at me, her expression unmoved. Life's tough. You better learn that fast. With nowhere to go, I left the house, each step away feeling like a descent into an unknown abyss. The future was a dark void, and I was walking into it alone. A month had passed since Mark's funeral, and I was living with Aunt Sarah, his kind-hearted aunt who had taken me in. The grief was still raw, but life had to go on, especially now that I was pregnant. I was in the middle of a web design project when Aunt Sarah called me from the living room. Rose, there's a call for you. Sounds important. Curious, I answered the phone. Hello, this is Rose. Mrs. Thompson, I'm John from Greenfield Notary. I'm calling about your late husband's last affairs, the voice on the other end said. My heart skipped a beat. What about them? I asked. Your husband had a life insurance policy, and you're the sole beneficiary. It's a substantial amount, John explained. I felt a mix of shock and relief. How much are we talking about? I inquired, trying to keep my voice steady. It's quite a large sum, Ms. Rose. Enough to secure a good future for you and your child, he replied. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This money could change everything. I could start a new life, provide for my baby, maybe even move to a place of our own. I shared the news with Aunt Sarah. That's wonderful, Rose. Mark always was thoughtful. He's taken care of you even now, she said, her eyes moist. The news of the insurance money spread quickly, and it wasn't long before Mrs. Thompson called. Rose, I heard about the insurance. We need to talk, she said, her tone insistent. I braced myself. What about it, Mrs. Thompson? You know, since you're the beneficiary, I think it's only fair that you share some of that money with us. After all, we're Mark's family too, she demanded. I couldn't believe her audacity. Share the money? After you kicked me out when I needed you the most? I replied, my voice firm. Well, we have expenses too, and you're living off my son's money, she retorted. That money is for me and my child, Mrs. Thompson. I won't give you a dime, I said, the resolve in my voice surprising even me. Think about it, Rose. Don't be selfish, she said before hanging up. But I had made up my mind. I was going to use that money to start a new life, far from the judgment and cruelty of Mrs. Thompson and Anna. I began looking for apartments, something cozy and welcoming, a place where I could raise my child in peace. The thought of having my own space, a sanctuary for me and my baby, filled me with hope. 6 months into my pregnancy, I was finally settling into my new apartment. It was a small, cozy place, filled with the promise of new beginnings. I had just finished setting up the baby's crib when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see Mrs. Thompson and Anna standing at my door when I opened it. Rose, we need to talk, Mrs. Thompson said, pushing past me into the apartment. Anna followed her, eyeing the place with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Nice little spot you got here, she remarked, her tone laced with envy. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to mask my discomfort. Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath. "We've been thinking about how things ended between us. We want to apologize." I was taken aback. "Apologize? After you threw me out?" Anna chimed in. "Look, Rose, we were upset. But we're family, right? We should stick together." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Family? You made it clear I was no longer part of your family." Mrs. Thompson glanced at my swollen belly and her tone softened. "We didn't know about the baby. We want to make things right." I scoffed. "Now that you see I'm actually pregnant, you suddenly care?" "It's not just that," Anna said quickly. "Things have been tough since you left. We thought maybe you could come back. Help out." I stared at them, incredulous. "You want me to come back after everything?" Mrs. Thompson took a step forward. "We need your help, Rose. Financially, we're struggling." I shook my head in disbelief. "So, this isn't about making amends. You just need money." Anna's face hardened. "Look, Rose, we all have to make sacrifices. You have the means to help the family." I felt a surge of anger. "I am not your family. Not anymore. You made that clear when you kicked me out." Mrs. Thompson's expression faltered. "Rose, please. Think of it as helping for the sake of your child's grandparents." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Grandparents? You never once acted like grandparents. You won't see a cent from me. And you certainly won't be a part of my child's life." The realization dawned on their faces. They had hoped for an easy solution to their problems, but I was no longer the same person they had once manipulated. Anna tried a different approach. "Rose, be reasonable. It's not good to hold grudges, especially in your condition. My condition has nothing to do with this. You made your bed, now lie in it," I said firmly. Defeated, Mrs. Thompson turned towards the door. "You'll regret this, Rose. Family is everything." As they left, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They had come expecting to find the same vulnerable girl they had once known, but I had grown stronger, more resilient. I looked around my apartment, at the little crib that awaited my child, and I knew I had made the right decision. My future, and my child's future, was here, in this new life I had built for us. Living in my own space, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. My pregnancy was advancing well, and I was busy preparing for my new role as a mother. One evening, as I was browsing online for baby supplies, my phone rang. It was Aunt Sarah. "Rose, have you heard the latest about the Thompsons?" she asked, her voice tinged with a mix of concern and disbelief. "No, what happened?" I replied, pausing my browsing. "They're selling the house. Apparently, they're in deep financial trouble," Aunt Sarah informed me. I was stunned. "The house? But that's been in their family for years. Seems like they can't afford to keep it anymore. Anna's husband lost his job, and without your financial contribution, they've hit rock bottom," she explained. I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. I can't believe they're selling the house. Where will they go? From what I heard, they're moving into a much smaller place. Anna is not taking it well. She's had to get a job at a local store, Aunt Sarah said. The news hit me unexpectedly. Anna, who had always looked down on anyone who worked a regular job, was now working in retail. "Wow, that's a big change for her," I said, trying to process the information. "Yeah, she's been complaining to anyone who'll listen. But, maybe this will be a good lesson for her. A bit of hard work never hurt anyone," Aunt Sarah added. I thought about how much my life had changed since leaving the Thompson house. "I guess we all get what we deserve eventually," I mused. We chatted a bit more before saying our goodbyes. I sat back and thought about the twist of fate. Mrs. Thompson and Anna, once so proud and unyielding, were now facing their own struggles. It was a harsh reality, but one that seemed fitting given how they had treated me. I had learned the hard way that kindness and compassion were invaluable, and their absence could lead to a fall from grace. As I resumed browsing for baby items, I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the life I was building. My journey had been tough, but it led me to a place of independence and inner strength. The day I brought my son, Leo, home marked the start of a beautiful yet challenging journey. He was a bundle of joy, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, bringing a sense of purpose and love I had never known. As I watched him sleep peacefully in his crib, I thought about returning to my work as a web designer. Aunt Sarah had been my rock through all the upheaval, always there to offer support and wisdom. "You're going to balance this just fine, Rose," she reassured me one evening as we sat in the living room, Leo cradled in my arms. "You're strong, and you've got a good head on your shoulders." I smiled, grateful for her encouragement. "Thanks, Aunt Sarah. I just want to give Leo the best life possible." It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that my phone rang, shattering the calm. The caller ID showed Anna's number, a name I hadn't seen in months. With a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself. "Rose, you need to give us money. You're living all posh while we're scraping by." Anna's voice was sharp, tinged with desperation. I was taken aback by her blunt demand. "Anna, I'm not responsible for your financial situation. I have my own family to take care of now." "You always think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you got that insurance money," she retorted, her voice rising. "I've just given birth to a child, Anna. My focus is on my son now," I replied, trying to keep my composure. "I don't care about your kid. We need that money, Rose," she yelled into the phone. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How could she be so heartless? Without another word, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number. The nerve of her, demanding money and disregarding the fact that I was a new mother, struggling with my own challenges. Aunt Sarah, who had overheard the conversation, put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Don't let her get to you, Rose. You're doing what's best for you and Leo." I nodded, still shaken by the call. I just can't believe she would stoop so low. "It's unfortunate, but some people only think of themselves. You just focus on your baby and your work. You're doing great," Aunt Sarah encouraged. As I rocked Leo in my arms, I realized that this was my world now. My son, my work, and the new life I was building. No amount of guilt-tripping or demands from my past could take that away from me. I looked down at Leo, his innocent eyes slowly drifting closed, and whispered a promise to him. "We're going to be just fine, little one. Just you and me, and all the love in the world." Life with my newborn son, Leo, was a beautiful, if sometimes exhausting, adventure. Balancing motherhood and my web design business from home was challenging, but I found joy in every little moment with him. Aunt Sarah, my late husband's aunt, would often come over to help, her presence a constant comfort in my new life as a single mom. One sunny afternoon, I decided to take Leo for a walk in his stroller. The fresh air was good for both of us, and I enjoyed these quiet moments, walking through the neighborhood. On a whim, I decided to stop by a small store to pick up some essentials. As I maneuvered the stroller through the aisles, I spotted a familiar face. It was Anna, my sister-in-law, working as a salesperson. Her mother, Mrs. Thompson, was with her, and they were deep in conversation. I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast from the last time I saw them. Their clothes were worn and plain, far from the well-kept appearance they used to maintain. They looked tired, almost defeated. I paused for a moment, wondering if I should approach them, but they saw me first. Their faces changed instantly, a mix of surprise, embarrassment, and a hint of disdain. Neither of them made a move to speak to me, and I decided it was best to leave it that way. I continued my shopping, keeping my distance. I could feel their eyes on me as I moved through the store, but I focused on Leo, who was babbling happily in his stroller. As I left the store, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The last time I had seen Anna and Mrs. Thompson, they were in a completely different position, looking down on me from their perceived higher status. Now, the tables had turned. Not that I took any pleasure in their misfortune, but it was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. Back home, as I fed Leo and played with him, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It had been filled with ups and downs, but I had come out stronger, more resilient. I had a beautiful son, a career I was passionate about, and the support of Aunt Sarah. That evening, as I put Leo to bed, I whispered a promise to him. I'll always be here for you, my little one. We'll make our own way, no matter what life throws at us. My name's Linda, and if you told me a few years back that I'd be juggling a baby, a remote editing job, and a crumbling marriage, I'd have laughed in your face. But here I am, 33 and barely keeping my head above water. It all started when I was assigned to edit a book by Alex Chambers, a writer who was the talk of the town back then. I remember our first call. His voice, deep and a bit rough, came through the line, Linda, Alex Chambers. Got your notes? Let's talk shop. I was professional, of course. Sure, Alex. Chapter 3, the pacing feels off. And the character of John, he needs more depth. There was a pause, then a chuckle. Straight to the point, huh? I like that. That was our routine. Long calls, discussing his book, characters coming alive between us. Then one day, he threw me a curveball. Your voice, Linda, it's, I don't know, calming. Fancy meeting over coffee? Talk about the book face to face? I was taken aback, but curious. Sure, why not? So we met, and things clicked in a way I didn't expect. Fast forward through a whirlwind romance, and I found myself married to Alex Chambers, with a little girl, Lily, to complete the picture. Life was a dream, at first. Alex was charming, attentive. But when Lily came, and I switched to working from home, things started to shift. It started small. Alex, usually brimming with ideas, hit a dry spell. One night, as I was putting Lily to bed, I heard him cursing at his laptop. Nothing. Not a damn word comes to mind, he shouted. I peeked into his office. Hey, what's wrong? He spun around, his face a mix of frustration and despair. This book, Linda. It's like pulling teeth. I can't get the words out. Without thinking, I sat down next to him. Let me take a look. That night, I ended up rewriting half of chapter 4. Alex read it, his eyes widening. This is good, Linda. Really good. A spark of pride flickered in me. But it was soon overshadowed by a new routine. I found myself spending nights at the desk, transforming Alex's jumbled thoughts into coherent chapters. He'd hover over my shoulder, nodding and occasionally mumbling, "Yeah, that's good." One evening, as I wrapped up a chapter, Alex leaned in and kissed my forehead. Couldn't do this without you, babe. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I was tired, worn out from balancing my work, Lily, and now, Alex's book. I felt like I was losing myself in the process. As weeks turned into months, my role as the secret backbone of Alex's writing solidified. I was the one breathing life into his characters, crafting the twists and turns of his plots. But outside our home office, I was just Linda, Alex's wife. One day, as I was tidying up the living room, Alex walked in, phone in hand. Hey, Linda, my publisher loved the latest chapter. They think it's some of my best work. I forced a smile. That's great, Alex. He didn't notice the strain in my voice. Yeah, I told them I've been working hard on it. I bit back a sharp retort. Working hard? It was my words, my nights spent agonizing over every sentence. As Alex's book neared completion, my resentment grew. I was the muse he never acknowledged, the ghost in his success story. I remember confronting him about it one night. Alex, don't you think I deserve some credit? I've practically written half the book. He looked up, surprised. What? Linda, come on. It's my name on the cover. That's how it works. I stared at him, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. So, my work, my words, they mean nothing? Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're helping me, Linda. That's what partners do. But it's my book, my career. I walked out of the room, my heart heavy. It was clear to me then. In Alex's story, I was just a footnote, a nameless contributor. And that hurt more than I could say. The night the book was published, I held a copy in my hands. Flipping through the pages, my words stared back at me, hiding behind Alex's name. There was no mention of me in the acknowledgments, not even a subtle hint. I confronted Alex about it, my voice trembling with suppressed emotion. You didn't even mention me. Not once. He shrugged, oblivious to my hurt. It's just how it is, Linda. I'm the writer, you're the editor. We each have our roles. That was the moment I realized how invisible I'd become in Alex's world. It was a bitter pill to swallow, a harsh truth I had to face. My life turned into a pressure cooker about to blow. Juggling work, Lily, the house, and Alex's demands had me stretched thinner than a dollar store rubber band. One typical Tuesday, I was knee-deep in laundry when Alex barged in, his face buried in his phone. Linda, where's my blue shirt? The one I wore at last week's reading? I pointed to the ironing board without looking up. It's right there, Alex. Ironed it this morning. He grabbed the shirt and mumbled a half-hearted, thanks, already distracted by another text. I shook my head, feeling like part of the furniture. That night, after putting Lily to bed, I sat down to edit a manuscript for work. My eyes were heavy, my brain fried. Alex strolled in, a sheaf of papers in his hand. Hey, can you look at these? I need your magic touch. I glanced at the clock. It was already past 10. Alex, it's late, and I've got a pile of editing for work. He frowned, his voice rising. But this is important, Linda. My publisher's waiting. I sighed, taking the papers. Fine, but this is the last time, Alex. I can't keep doing this. He scoffed, what's the big deal? You're just sitting at home all day. I snapped. Just sitting at home? Really, Alex? Between Lily, the house, and your never-ending book needs, I barely have time to breathe. Alex rolled his eyes. Dramatic much? I'm the one with the real job here. That stung. Real job? I'm an editor, Alex, not your personal assistant. He shrugged, clearly not getting it. Whatever, just do what you can. I worked on his manuscript, resentment boiling inside me. Each word I edited felt like a betrayal to my own work. The next day, as I was fixing lunch, Alex waltzed in, phone in hand again. Linda, I need you to draft some emails to my publisher. And book my flight to New York next week. I slammed the knife down on the counter. Do it yourself, Alex. I'm not your secretary. He looked taken aback. What's gotten into you? I exploded. I'm tired, Alex. Tired of being your invisible helper, tired of putting my life on hold. He tried to interrupt, but I plowed on. No, let me finish. I'm also a person, with dreams and a career. But you just take and never give a damn. Alex's face hardened. Fine, do what you want. I don't need your help. I watched him storm out, feeling a mix of relief and dread. But as I stood in the silent kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a lot harder. The day I uncovered Alex's infidelity felt like any other, until I stumbled upon something that turned my world upside down. I was sorting through our joint bank statements when I noticed a peculiar charge. Alex had booked a hotel room, supposedly for a fan meetup. But it wasn't a single room like usual, this time, it was a double. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. A double room? Why would he need that? The question echoed in my mind, but deep down, I feared I already knew the answer. I decided to confront him when he got back. He walked through the door that evening, looking weary but satisfied. "Hey, Linda, back from the event. It was great," he said, trying to kiss me. I dodged his kiss and held up the bank statement. "Why'd you book a double room, Alex?" He glanced at the statement, his face momentarily blank. "Oh, that? Must be a mistake. I booked a single, like always." I wanted to believe him, but the doubt had already seated itself. "A mistake, huh? Okay." Later that night, after Alex came home drunk, he crashed into bed, leaving his phone carelessly on the nightstand. A voice inside me whispered to check it. I hesitated, but curiosity and suspicion won. Picking up his phone, I felt like a detective in a bad movie, but what I found was no fiction. His messages were a maze of lies and deceit. There it was, a string of texts with someone named Julia. They weren't just friendly, they were intimate, full of plans and secrets. I scrolled through their conversations, each message a stab to my heart. Alex's words about me were the worst, calling me a fool, saying he only kept me around as a servant. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept going, screenshotting everything. Then I found the photos, Alex and Julia, together in ways that left no room for doubt. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, horrifying, but impossible to look away. I transferred all the evidence to my laptop, a heavy knot forming in my stomach. This was more than a hunch now, it was cold, hard proof of his betrayal. The next day, I acted like everything was normal. Alex, clueless and hungover, didn't suspect a thing. "Morning, Linda. What's for breakfast?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "Just cereal," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm inside. As he sat eating, oblivious, I studied him. This was the man I married, the father of my child, living a double life right under my nose. Anger and hurt welled up inside me, but I pushed them down. I needed to be smart, to plan my next move carefully. That day, as I went about my chores and work, part of me was elsewhere, plotting, planning. Alex's betrayal had shattered something fundamental between us. But I wasn't going to let him see me break. Not yet. I had to be strategic, to hit him where it hurt most. And for that, I needed to keep my discovery a secret, for now. It was a regular evening, Alex was lounging in his chair, absorbed in his laptop. Lily had just fallen asleep, and the house was quiet. The perfect setting for a confrontation. I approached him hesitantly. "Alex, can we talk? It's important." He barely glanced up. "Sure, what's up?" I took a deep breath, my phone recording in my pocket. "I'm burned out, Alex. Writing your books, managing the house, taking care of Lily. I can't do it anymore." His fingers stopped typing. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What do you mean you can't do it? You know how important this is to me." I persisted, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. "It's too much. I have my own work, and Lily needs more of my time. I can't write your books for you anymore." Alex's face reddened. "You can't just quit, Linda. My career depends on those books. You're supposed to support me, not bail out." I tried to sound as reasonable as possible. "Support goes both ways, Alex. I need your understanding now." He scoffed. "Understanding? I've given you a comfortable life, a home, and this is how you repay me? By backing out when I need you the most." His words stung, but I needed him to admit the full extent of my role. "I've been doing more than backing you up, Alex. I've been writing your books, and it's taking a toll on me." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're just the editor, Linda. Let's not overstate your role here." I felt my patience waning. "Just the editor? Alex, who do you think has been coming up with the plots, the dialogues, refining the characters?" "It's been me." His voice rose in anger. "So what? My name is on those books. Without me, they'd be nothing. You're nothing without me." I edged closer, ensuring my phone caught every word. Are you saying you'd be nothing without my writing? He laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. Of course not. I'm the author, but you quitting now is like a betrayal. You can't leave me hanging. If you stop writing for me, I'll make sure you regret it. I asked, baiting him further. Is that a threat, Alex? He leaned in, his face inches from mine. Yes, it's a threat. You're my wife, Linda. You do what's needed for this family, for my career. If you think you can just walk away from this, think again. I'll divorce you and make sure you get nothing. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I had what I needed. Okay, Alex. We'll see about that. He stormed off to his office, slamming the door behind him. Alone, I took out my phone and ended the recording. Listening back, his words were damning, an unequivocal admission of his dependence on me, mixed with threats and arrogance. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. The man I once loved had turned into a stranger, one who saw me as nothing more than a tool for his success. But now, with this recording, the tables were turned. I had the power to expose him, to tear down the facade he'd so carefully built. My mind raced with possibilities. I could take this to his publisher, the media, or use it in a legal battle. Whatever path I chose, one thing was clear: our marriage was over, and it was time for Alex to face the consequences of his actions. The day of Alex's big press conference was my chosen moment for revelation. Clutching the recording of his admission, my plan was set in motion. Alex was oblivious, caught up in his usual pre-event frenzy. Linda, make sure the presentation is spot on. This is huge for me, he stressed, pacing around the living room. I nodded, hiding my nerves behind a calm facade. I've got it under control, Alex. Little did he know, the presentation I had prepared was a far cry from his expectations. I had embedded not just the transcript of our conversation, but also the audio recording, ready to expose his duplicity to the world. The conference day arrived. I was a bundle of nerves and determination, watching as Alex took the stage with his usual flair. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Today, I'll give you an insight into my creative process. As the first slide flashed up, Alex's confident smile wavered. The room fell into a stunned silence as his own words appeared on the screen, followed by his voice echoing through the speakers, confessing his reliance on me for his books. The shock in the room was palpable. Alex fumbled for words. There seems to be some mistake. But the damage was done. The crowd was in an uproar, murmurs and gasps filling the air, while cameras clicked frantically, capturing every moment of his unraveling facade. The aftermath of the press conference was like a hurricane tearing through our lives. Alex, once the master of his domain, was now caught in the eye of the storm he had created. His fury when he returned home was palpable, a tempest of anger and disbelief. You've completely destroyed me, Linda. My career, my reputation. How could you? He raged, his voice echoing through the halls of our once peaceful home. I faced him, my resolve unwavering. I'm filing for divorce, Alex. I can't be part of this lie anymore. His anger turned to desperation. Divorce? You can't be serious. Think about Lily, think about what you're doing to our family. I sighed, a weight lifting off my shoulders. It's over, Alex. I know about Julia too. The lies, the betrayal. It's all out now. He sank into a chair, his energy deflated. Linda, I didn't mean for any of this. I shook my head. It doesn't matter what you meant. It's what you did. And now, everyone knows. As his career began to crumble, with publishers distancing themselves and fans expressing their outrage, I took the opportunity to reclaim my voice. I decided to continue the book series under my own name, my work finally receiving the recognition it deserved. In the midst of this, a surprising twist came my way. Alex's mistress, a woman with considerable influence in the media, approached me discreetly. She was desperate to keep her name out of the scandal and offered a substantial sum to ensure her anonymity in court. After much contemplation, I agreed to her terms. This wasn't just about retribution, it was about securing a stable future for Lily and me. The money meant freedom and a fresh start. The day of the divorce hearing arrived, and Alex's demeanor had shifted from anger to a plea for reconciliation. "Linda, we can sort this out. We can go to counseling, start over. Please, don't do this." I looked at him, seeing the man I once loved, now a stranger consumed by his own deceit. "It's too late, Alex. I can't erase what you've done, the lies you've told. It's over." In the courtroom, the air was tense. Alex's lawyer tried to argue for leniency, but the evidence against him was undeniable. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me a significant compensation and full custody of Lily. Alex was ordered to pay child support, a final blow to his already faltering financial state. Returning home, I watched Lily playing in the living room, her laughter a balm to my soul. I knew the road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, her gentle breathing was a reminder of the new beginning that lay ahead of us. "Mommy, will everything be okay?" she murmured sleepily. I kissed her forehead, whispering, "Yes, my love. Everything will be just fine. We have each other, and that's all we need." In the quiet of the night, I reflected on the tumultuous journey. The pain and betrayal had been overwhelming, but they had led me to a newfound strength and independence. It was the end of a painful chapter, but the start of something new, a future where I was the author of my own story, free to write the next chapters as I saw fit. In the wake of our divorce, life settled into a new rhythm. I focused on raising Lily and my burgeoning writing career, now rightfully acknowledged under my name. Alex's presence in our lives dwindled, his visits with Lily becoming infrequent and strained. One afternoon, while Lily was at school, I sat at my desk, working on my latest book. The phone rang, breaking the silence. It was Alex, his voice barely a whisper. "Linda, I've messed up," he said, a tremor in his voice. "What happened, Alex?" I asked, my tone guarded. He sighed heavily. "I published a book about my affair. I was desperate, Linda. I thought it might save my career. But I named Julia in it." I was stunned. "You named her? After everything?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, and now she's suing me. She won the case. I have to pay her $1 million, Linda. I'm ruined." I shook my head, disbelief and a twinge of pity mingling inside me. "Alex, why would you do that? You knew the consequences." "I don't know, Linda. I don't know what I thought." I ended the call, feeling a mix of emotions. It was a stark reminder of how far Alex had fallen, a victim of his own hubris and poor choices. Weeks passed, and the news of Alex's latest fiasco spread. His already tarnished reputation took another hit. Meanwhile, my own career flourished. My books, once hidden behind Alex's name, were now celebrated for their authentic voice and compelling storytelling. One day, as I picked Lily up from school, her teacher, Ms. Adams, approached me. "Linda, I just wanted to say, I've been reading your books. They're incredible. You're so talented." I smiled, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. "Thank you, Ms. Adams. That means a lot." As Lily and I walked home, hand in hand, she looked up at me with her bright, curious eyes. "Mommy, are you happy now?" I squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, Lily, I am. Very happy." It was true. Despite the tumultuous journey, I had found my voice, my independence. I was no longer overshadowed by Alex's deceit. That evening, as I tucked Lily into bed, her soft voice broke the silence. "Mommy, will Daddy be okay?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "Daddy made some mistakes, sweetheart. But he'll learn from them, hopefully." She nodded, her eyes slowly closing. "I love you, Mommy." "I love you too, Lily. More than anything." As I turned off the light, I realized that this was not just the end of a painful chapter, but the beginning of a new one. A chapter filled with hope, strength, and the unwavering love between a mother and her daughter. In the quiet of the night, I reflected on the journey. Karma had played its hand, and in its wake, left a path for new beginnings. I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined. My story, once hidden behind the shadow of another, was now mine to write, and I embraced it with open arms.
In our cozy little home, life often felt like a well-orchestrated symphony, each day flowing into the next with a comforting regularity. I'm Eliza, a dedicated dentist whose life revolves around caring for others, both in my clinic and at home. My husband, Tom, a man whose past life had etched lines of worry and contemplation on his face, was often my partner in quiet evenings spent discussing everything and nothing. This particular evening, however, held a different tune. As I entered our home, the aroma of simmering stew greeted me, a sign of Tom's attempt to provide some culinary comfort. I found him in the kitchen, looking more troubled than usual. "Hey love, what's cooking?" I asked, trying to inject some lightness into the heavy air. Tom glanced up, managing a weak smile. "Just some stew." "Eliza, we need to talk about something important. It's about Alex." Alex, Tom's son from his previous marriage, lived with his mother in a different city. Our interactions were limited to brief, somewhat formal exchanges on Skype, his shy demeanor never allowing me to know him beyond the basic pleasantries. "What about Alex? Is he okay?" I queried, concern lacing my voice as I took a seat at the kitchen table. Tom joined me, his hands clasped together, the weight of his words gathering like storm clouds. "He's fine, health-wise. But he's been given a chance to follow his dream of forming a band. He's really passionate about it, Eliza. But, well, he needs our financial help." I leaned in, listening intently. "How much does he need?" I asked, my mind already sifting through our finances. Tom hesitated, then uttered, "Around $10,000. It's for the equipment, some studio time, things like that." I took a deep breath, the number settling in my mind. "That's a significant amount, Tom. But if it's for his dream, tell me, have you seen any of his work? Is he serious about this path?" He nodded vigorously. "I've heard some of his music during our calls. He spends every spare moment he has on it. I believe in him, Eliza." I watched the earnest look in his eyes, a father's love mingling with hope. "All right, Tom. If you believe this is right, I trust your judgment. Let's support Alex. But, let's also ensure it's a wise decision. We should probably have a chat with him, understand his plan a little better." Tom's face lit up with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Eliza. This means the world to him, and to me. And yes, let's arrange a call with him soon." As we sat there planning our next steps, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and apprehension. I was about to invest in a dream, in a young man I barely knew, hoping that our contribution would set him on a path to success and fulfillment. It was a risk, but perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, a risk worth taking for family. Months slipped by after the first financial aid for Tom's son, Alex. Life resumed its usual pace with my dental practice bustling and Tom's work steady. Then one evening, as autumn leaves began to paint the ground in hues of amber and gold, Tom approached me with a familiar hesitancy in his eyes. "Eliza, can we talk about something?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge of discomfort. I nodded, setting aside the book I was reading. "Of course, what's on your mind?" He took a deep breath, his gaze avoiding mine. "It's about Alex again. He's making great progress with his music, really diving into it. But he needs more support, another $10,000. I felt a twinge of surprise, my eyebrows knitting together in concern. "Another $10,000? But we just provided for his initial setup. What does he need this time?" Tom's fingers fidgeted with the hem of his shirt. He's looking to upgrade some equipment, maybe get into a better studio. It's just that, things are getting more serious for him now. I sighed, a sense of unease settling in. Tom, I understand wanting to support Alex, but we need to be mindful. We're talking about a lot of money here. I earn well, but these are hard-earned savings. We need to think about our future too. Tom's face turned a shade darker, his voice raising slightly. But it's for Alex, Eliza. My son. Don't you think he deserves this chance? His tone stung, a hint of accusation lingering in the air. Of course, I do, I replied, my voice firm yet calm. But I also believe in responsible support. We can't just keep handing out money without understanding the full picture. The conversation grew heated, our words a volley of concern and frustration. Then, suddenly, Tom's demeanor shifted from defensive to outright angry. You just don't understand, Eliza. You're not a parent. You don't know what it's like to want to give everything to your child. His words cut deep, echoing around the room. I recoiled, hurt flashing in my eyes. Tom, that's unfair. I've been nothing but supportive. But we can't be reckless. And your son is almost an adult, he needs to learn financial responsibility too. Tom shook his head, his anger boiling over. You're just being selfish and greedy, Eliza. You don't understand what family means. With that, he stormed out of the house, leaving me in a stunned silence. His accusations felt like a slap, the word greedy reverberating in my mind. I sat there, trying to piece together the fragments of our conversation, the harmony of our life now disturbed by a growing discord. Days turned into a week, and Tom's absence stretched on. I was left to ponder the situation alone, my concern for Alex's future wrestling with my dismay at Tom's reaction. When Tom finally returned, his demeanor had softened, but the underlying issue remained unresolved. I'm sorry, Eliza, he said, his voice low. I shouldn't have exploded like that. It's just, I want to do right by Alex. I nodded, accepting his apology but feeling the distance between us. I understand, Tom. But we need to be a team in this, especially when it comes to big decisions. Reluctantly, I agreed to the additional support for Alex, my heart heavy with apprehension. Tom's immediate switch back to his affectionate self was a relief, but also a reminder of the fragile balance we were treading. The cycle of financial requests for Tom's son had become a recurring theme, straining not just our bank account, but also the very fabric of our relationship. Just as the leaves began to shift to the fiery colors of fall, Tom approached me again, his demeanor more desperate than before. Eliza, we need to talk about Alex again, he began, avoiding my gaze. I set down my book, a sense of dread filling the air. What is it this time, Tom? He fidgeted, clearly uncomfortable. It's a big opportunity for him, a chance to go on a tour with his band. He needs our help, Eliza. He needs $30,000. I was taken aback, the figure echoing in my mind like a bad joke. 30,000? Tom, this is getting out of hand. We've been supportive, but this is too much. Tom's face flushed with frustration. But it's for his future, Eliza. Can't you see? He could make it big. I stood up, feeling the tension like a physical force between us. And I want to support him, but not blindly. We've never even seen him play. We don't know if this band is real or just a whim. We need some kind of proof, Tom. His voice raised, a note of panic creeping in. Why can't you just trust me, Eliza? Why do you need proof for everything? I replied, my own voice rising in response. Because trust is based on honesty and responsibility, Tom. And right now, I'm not seeing a lot of either. The room was thick with unsaid words and mounting frustrations. Tom then dropped a bombshell that shattered any semblance of normalcy. If you don't give this money for Alex, I don't think I can stay in this marriage. I felt as if the floor had fallen out beneath me. Are you blackmailing me, Tom? Using our marriage as a bargaining chip for money? He didn't answer, his silence speaking volumes. I realized then that our issues ran deeper than I had ever imagined. This was about more than money, it was about respect, trust, and the balance of power in our relationship. I need time to think, I said finally, my voice hollow. This isn't something I can decide right now. Tom stormed out, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts. I knew something had to change. We couldn't continue down this path of ultimatums and financial demands. That night, as I lay in bed, the space beside me cold and empty, I realized that I was at a crossroads. One path led to giving in to Tom's demands, sacrificing my principles and possibly my financial security. The other was fraught with the unknown, potentially leading to the end of my marriage. In the quiet of our home, I sat down with my laptop, a sense of unease stirring within me as I navigated to Alex's Instagram page. The images that greeted me were far from what I expected of a struggling musician. Lavish parties, designer clothes, exotic locations, it all painted a picture of luxury that belied the story we'd been told. I needed answers directly from Alex. I called him on Skype, ensuring the video recording was on, ready to confront him about the inconsistencies. He answered, his face a mask of casual indifference. Alex, we need to talk about the money your dad and I have been sending you. I began, my tone firm. He shrugged nonchalantly. What about it? I didn't mince words. I've seen your Instagram. Your lifestyle doesn't match up with needing money for a band. I'm not sending any more money. His face changed then, the cool facade slipping into something darker. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections, people that can make life very unpleasant for you. I felt a chill at his threat, but I didn't waver. Alex, I've been recording this conversation. Threatening me is a serious offense. I can take this to the police. The bravado drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, frightened boy. Tears welled up in his eyes as he realized the gravity of his actions. Please, no. I was just talking big. I'm not in any gang. I don't want any trouble with the police. His sudden shift from intimidation to desperation made me pause. He was on the verge of revealing something more, something that might explain the bizarre turn of events. Sitting back, I watched Alex's face, tear-streaked and pale, as he prepared to spill the secrets he'd been holding onto. All right, Alex, let's hear it then. What's going on? Through sobs, Alex began to unravel the web of lies. It started off small, just me wanting some extra cash. But then I found something about Dad. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. What did you find about your dad, Alex? He wiped his eyes, taking a shaky breath. I found out he was seeing someone, not just anyone, someone from his past. I took pictures, threatened to tell you unless he kept sending money. My world spun with his confession. Tom has been unfaithful? And you've been blackmailing him? Alex nodded miserably. Yes. I never meant for it to get this far. I wanted to live a certain way, and when I found out about Dad, it seemed like an easy way to keep the money coming. I felt a mix of anger and pity. Alex, do you realize how serious this is? Blackmail is a crime. And your father, how could he? He sniffled, looking down. I know it's messed up. I don't know, I got in too deep. But I swear, Eliza, I don't want to cause any more trouble. I'll stop. I'll figure something else out. I sighed, the weight of the situation heavy on my shoulders. And the band, the tours, all of that was just a lie? He nodded again. Yeah. I'm sorry. I like music, sure, but there was no band. I just needed a story for the money. I sat back, processing everything. My husband had been unfaithful, my stepson a blackmailer. The foundation of my family was cracked and broken. Alex, I need to talk to your father about this. And you need to sort yourself out. This isn't the way to go through life. He nodded, a small glimmer of understanding in his eyes. I know. I'm sorry, Eliza. Really. As the call ended, I was left in a silent house, the echo of Alex's confessions ringing in my ears. The lies were unraveling, revealing a painful truth I could no longer ignore. I knew the next step was confronting Tom, but a part of me dreaded what that confrontation would bring. The man I had built a life with was a stranger, and our marriage a facade. I needed to gather my strength, for the conversation ahead would be the most challenging of my life. The house felt unbearably quiet as I waited for Tom to return. The ticking of the clock seemed to echo my racing heart, each minute stretching longer than the last. When I finally heard the turn of the key in the lock, my stomach knotted with anxiety. Tom entered, immediately sensing the storm brewing in the air. Eliza, what's wrong? You look like you're about to explode. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Tom, we need to talk. Now. He hesitated, then nodded, taking a seat across from me. What's it about? I didn't beat around the bush. It's about Alex, Tom. And it's about you. I know everything, the blackmail, the affair. Alex confessed. Tom's face paled, his eyes widening in shock. What? Eliza, I can explain. I felt a surge of anger. Explain? How can you possibly explain lying to me, allowing your son to blackmail you, and using our money to cover up your affair? He looked down, shame etched across his face. I was afraid, Eliza. Afraid of losing you. I thought I could control the situation, but it spiraled out of control. I shook my head, my voice rising. Control? You call this control? You've been living a double life, Tom. And all the while, lying to my face. Tom's voice broke. I'm sorry, Eliza. I never meant for any of this to happen. I didn't know how to handle it. I stood up, my hands trembling with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. Sorry doesn't cut it, Tom. Your son was threatening me, using gang connections to intimidate me because of your mistakes. Tom stood as well, reaching out to me. Please, Eliza, let's try to work this out. I'll do anything. I pushed his hand away. Work this out? How can I possibly trust you again? How can we go back to how things were knowing what I know now? He had no answer, just stood there, a man broken by his own deceit. I knew then that our marriage was beyond repair. The trust that once bound us together had been shattered by lies and blackmail. Tom, I need you to leave, I said, my voice cold and final. He didn't argue, just nodded silently and walked out, the door closing with a soft click that seemed to echo the closing chapter of our life together. As I sat back down, alone in the echoing silence of our home, I felt a profound sense of loss and betrayal. But amidst the pain, there was also a flicker of relief. The truth was out, painful as it was, and now I could begin to heal, to rebuild my life on a foundation of honesty and self-respect. In the aftermath of our confrontation, the house felt empty, the silence a constant reminder of the betrayal and deceit that had unfolded. I knew I couldn't just let things end there. There needed to be consequences for the lies and the financial manipulation. It was time for a legal reckoning. I found myself sitting across from a lawyer, my hands clenched tightly in my lap. Mrs. Johnson, I've gone through all the information you provided, he began, his tone professional yet sympathetic. I need to pursue legal action, I stated firmly. Not just for the divorce, but for the recovery of the money Tom used for his blackmail payments, and for the emotional distress this has caused me. The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. We can certainly file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and emotional distress. As for the money, we'll need all the evidence you have of the transactions and any communication between you and your husband or stepson regarding this matter. I assured him I had kept meticulous records. I trusted Tom completely. Never thought I'd need these as evidence against him, I admitted, a sad irony in my voice. He offered a small, reassuring smile. You're doing the right thing by protecting yourself and your assets. This won't be easy, but I'll be with you every step of the way. The following weeks were a blur of legal documents, meetings, and court appearances. Tom looked defeated each time our paths crossed, the reality of his actions finally hitting home. At one such encounter, he approached me, his expression one of regret. Eliza, I never wanted it to come to this. I'm sorry. I looked at him, the man I once loved, now a stranger. Sorry isn't enough, Tom. You made your choices, and now we're both living with the consequences. The final court session was the hardest. I sat there, listening as my lawyer laid out the case, detailing the emotional and financial toll of Tom's deceit. When the judge finally spoke, granting me the divorce along with compensation for the misused funds and emotional suffering, I felt a bittersweet relief. As I walked out of the courtroom, the weight of the past months felt both heavier and lighter. I had stood up for myself, faced the legal battle, and emerged with a sense of closure, albeit a painful one. But the journey wasn't over. There were still pieces of my life to pick up, a future to rebuild. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but as I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt a glimmer of hope. I decided to visit my old friend and confidant, Martha, who had been a pillar of support through my ordeal. As I entered her cozy living room, she greeted me with a warm, knowing smile. Eliza, look at you. How are you holding up? She asked, ushering me to sit. I sighed, a small smile playing on my lips. I'm okay, Martha. It's been tough, but I feel like I'm finally seeing the light at the end of this long, dark tunnel. Martha patted my hand gently. You've been through so much, my dear. But you handled it with such grace and strength. I'm proud of you. I nodded, feeling a sense of pride myself. It was hard, Martha, facing Tom in court, unraveling all the lies. But I stood up for myself. And now, it's time for a new beginning. Martha's eyes twinkled with encouragement. So, what's next for Eliza Johnson? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. First, I think I need some time to heal, to rediscover who I am outside of this whole mess. Then, I want to focus on my work, maybe even take a vacation, something I haven't done in years. Sounds like a plan, Martha replied warmly. And remember, Eliza, this is your chance to rewrite your story, on your own terms. Her words resonated within me. Yes, I had been through a storm, but now I had the opportunity to chart my own course. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in work and self-care. I took up yoga, started reading more, and even planned a solo trip to a place I'd always wanted to visit. Life without Tom was different, but it was mine to shape. One evening, as I was preparing for my trip, the doorbell rang. It was Alex. He stood there, looking nervous and remorseful. Eliza, I just wanted to say I'm sorry, face to face. For everything, he stammered. I regarded him, seeing not the aggressive young man from our Skype call, but a remorseful, lost boy. Thank you, Alex. I hope you've learned from this, and that you're making changes for the better. He nodded earnestly. I am. And I owe it to you for standing up to me. You helped me see how wrong I was. I smiled slightly, acknowledging his apology. Take care of yourself, Alex. And make good choices, okay? As he walked away, I closed the door and turned back to my own path, feeling a sense of closure. The journey had been arduous, but I emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The sun set in a blaze of glory, its vibrant hues a promise of the new chapter awaiting me. A chapter of healing, growth, and self-discovery. A new horizon was before me, and I stepped forward with determination and hope, ready to embrace whatever the future held. I'm Bella, 27, and by no means a pushover. I work as a secretary, a job that has me juggling calls and coffee, all while trying to keep a straight face when my boss cracks one of his stale jokes. Life was a regular routine until that night at a friend's party when I bumped into Jake. Jake was a tall, lanky guy with a smile that could light up the room. He had that effortless charm about him, cracking jokes one minute and deep in thought the next. We got talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. "Hey, I'm Jake. You look like you could use a better drink than that," he said, nodding at the almost empty plastic cup in my hand. I raised an eyebrow, "And you look like you've got a better suggestion?" "Follow me and find out," he grinned, leading the way to where the real party was, a table laden with all sorts of drinks. We spent the evening talking about everything and nothing. His jokes were actually funny, a refreshing change from the dry humor I was used to at work. As the party wound down, we exchanged numbers. "Don't be a stranger," Jake said as he left, "or do, but only if you're into that mystery vibe." I laughed, tucking away his number. "We'll see, funny guy." As I headed home, I couldn't shake off the feeling that this was the beginning of something. But that night, it was just the city lights, the lingering laughter from the party, and the slight buzz from the drinks. The next few weeks were a blur of texts and calls with Jake. He was like a breath of fresh air, always popping up with a joke or a plan to meet up. It was hard not to get swept up in his energy. Then came the day he invited me over to his place. "You gotta meet the folks," he said casually, as if it wasn't a big deal. "Meet your parents?" I hesitated. "Aren't we moving a bit fast?" "Nah, they're cool. Plus, I want them to meet the girl who's been stealing all my time," he joked, but I could tell he was serious. I agreed, not knowing what I was walking into. Looking back, I wish I had taken a bit more time, maybe then I would have seen what was coming. But life doesn't give you a heads up, does it? No, it just throws you in the deep end and watches as you try to swim. The day to meet Jake's parents came quicker than I'd have liked. I remember standing in front of my closet, trying to pick out something that said, "Nice to meet you," and not, "I'm here to steal your son." Finally, settling on a simple dress, I took a deep breath and headed out. Jake's house was one of those big, sprawling places with a garden out front. Flowers, trees, you name it, his mom had it growing there. "She'll love to show you around," Jake had said with an enthusiasm I didn't quite share. As we walked up to the door, Jake squeezed my hand. "Don't worry, they're going to love you." The door swung open, and there stood Mrs. Green, a woman with a stern look that could make a grown man flinch. "So, this is her," she said, eyeing me from head to toe. Not exactly the warm welcome I was hoping for. "Mom, this is Bella." "Bella, my mother," Jake introduced. "Charmed," I said, extending my hand. She gave a nod, her lips tight. "Come in. Let's not stand around." The inside of the house was as immaculate as the garden. We sat in the living room, and that's when the interrogation began. Mrs. Green didn't waste any time. "So, Bella, Jake tells us you're a secretary. That must be interesting," she said, the word interesting hanging in the air like it was a bad smell. "Yeah, it's got its moments. Keeps me on my toes," I replied, trying to keep it light. "And your boss, he's a man, I presume," she prodded, her eyes narrowing. I nodded. "Yes, he is. A very professional and respectful one." Mrs. Green hummed, as if she had expected as much. "I suppose you spend a lot of time together, being his secretary and all." I could feel the insinuation heavy in her tone. Jake jumped in. "Mom, come on, let's not start this." "No, it's okay," I said, feeling a need to defend myself. "We work together, but that's it. There's nothing more." Mrs. Green looked at me, then at Jake, and then back to me. "I see. Well, as long as it's professional." The conversation stumbled on, every topic somehow circling back to my job or my relationship with my boss. It was like she had a one-track mind set on making me uncomfortable. At one point, Jake excused himself to take a call, leaving me alone with his mother. "You know, my son could do a lot better than a secretary," she said, her voice low but clear. I was taken aback. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I care a lot about Jake, and I'm not here to cause any trouble. Mrs. Green stood up, her posture rigid. Just so we're clear, I have my eye on you. Any slip up, and I'll make sure Jake sees sense. The threat hung between us, heavy and cold. I sat there, trying to process what just happened. It was clear this wasn't going to be easy. When Jake came back, I plastered a smile on my face, but inside, I was reeling. After a few months of dating, Jake and I decided it was time to take the next step, moving in together. I remember the day I left my small, cozy apartment, boxes in hand, a mix of excitement and nerves bubbling in my stomach. Jake was all grins, helping me settle into what was now our place. It was nice, waking up next to him every morning, sharing coffee and lazy weekends. But as they say, good things never last, especially if Mrs. Green has anything to say about it. One Saturday morning, as we were lounging around, the doorbell rang. Jake went to answer it, and in came Mrs. Green, her eyes scanning the room like she was looking for something, or rather, someone to criticize. "Mother, what a surprise," Jake said, clearly caught off guard. "Save it, Jacob. I know what's going on here," she snapped, her eyes finally landing on me. "Living in sin, are we?" Jake's face turned red. "Mom, it's not like that. We're serious about each other." She scoffed. "Serious? Please. You barely know her." I stood up, feeling the need to defend our relationship. "Mrs. Green, I care about Jake, and we're happy together." "Happy?" She laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room. "Let's see how happy you are when the novelty wears off." She walked around, inspecting the place like she was going to find something incriminating. Her eyes landed on a photo of Jake and me at a beach. "And what's this?" "Hardly appropriate, wouldn't you say?" Jake tried to intervene. "Mom, that's enough." But she was on a roll. "I won't have my son shacking up with just anyone. What will people think?" I could feel the anger rising in me. "We're not hurting anyone. We're adults, making our own decisions." Mrs. Green turned to me, her gaze sharp. "You may have fooled my son, but you don't fool me. I see right through you." The argument escalated from there, voices raised, words thrown like punches. In the end, Mrs. Green left, but not before declaring, "This isn't over." Her visit left a sour taste, the tension hanging between Jake and me. We tried to brush it off, go about our day, but it wasn't the same. Her words echoed in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the disapproval looming over us. As days turned into weeks, the strain grew. Small arguments became regular, each one chipping away at the happiness we had built. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mrs. Green was somewhere out there, smirking, pleased with the chaos she had sown. One night, I worked late. The project was a beast, and everyone had left except me and my boss, who was in his office doing who knows what. "Bella, you still here?" my boss called out as he finally emerged. "Yeah, just finishing up this report," I replied, stretching my arms. "Late night, huh? Let me drive you home." "It's not safe this late," he offered. I was tired, the thought of waiting for a bus wasn't appealing, so I agreed. We walked to his car, making small talk about the day. It was all very normal until we pulled up to my place. "Thanks for the ride," I said, reaching for the door. "No problem, Bella. See you tomorrow," he replied with a tired smile. As I got out of the car, I didn't notice Jake standing there, his face a mix of anger and hurt. I realized too late as he stormed towards me. "Bella, what the hell is this?" Jake shouted, his eyes darting from me to my boss driving away. "It's not what it looks like, Jake. He was just giving me a ride home," I tried to explain. "A ride home? At this hour? With him?" He was fuming, not listening to a word I said. "Jake, please, you're overreacting. It's late, I was alone at the office, and he offered to drive me. That's all," I pleaded. "All, huh? And I'm supposed to believe that?" His voice was loud, attracting a few glances from neighbors. "I'm telling you the truth. Why won't you believe me?" My voice cracked, the frustration and hurt bubbling up. "Because I know men like him. And you, out late, with your boss? It's not right," he accused. Jake, you're being ridiculous. Nothing is going on. I love you, I said, my voice firm. He scoffed. Yeah? Well, it sure doesn't look like it. The argument went back and forth, each accusation more hurtful than the last. Eventually, he stormed off, leaving me standing there, alone and bewildered. I grabbed a few essentials and headed back to my old place. The night was quiet, but my mind was a loud mess of thoughts and worries. I couldn't believe a simple act of kindness from my boss would lead to this. No sooner had I settled into my old, now strangely unfamiliar bed, the phone rang. It was Mrs. Green. Her voice oozed satisfaction. Well, Bella, seems like you've moved back. Can't say I'm surprised. I knew it was only a matter of time. Her laughter was cold, ringing in my ears long after I had hung up. I lay there, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I realized then that this was far from over. Her glee at my predicament was just another reminder of the uphill battle I was facing, not just with Jake, but with his entire family. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread for what was yet to come. Life was quiet after the big blowout with Jake. I kept to myself, trying to mend the pieces of my bruised heart. Days turned into weeks, and just as I started to feel a bit like my old self again, life decided to throw me another curveball. I found out I was pregnant. I remember sitting in my bathroom, staring at the positive test. A mix of emotions flooded through me: fear, excitement, but mostly a deep, nagging worry about how Jake would react. I debated telling him, going back and forth in my mind, but eventually, I decided against it. I would raise this child on my own. But secrets have a way of coming out, and this one was no different. Jake found out. I still don't know how, but one day, there he was, standing at my door, looking as shocked and scared as I felt. Bella, is it true? Are we going to have a baby? He stammered, his face pale. I nodded, unable to form words. The silence stretched between us, heavy and awkward. Why didn't you tell me, Bella? Why? He finally managed, his voice a mix of hurt and anger. I was scared, Jake. Scared of how you'd react, scared of doing this all alone, I confessed, the words tumbling out. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew all too well. We should have talked about it. It's not just your decision, Bella. I knew he was right, but at the moment, it didn't seem that simple. I know, and I'm sorry. I didn't know what to do. We talked for hours, going in circles, the same arguments, the same fears. But as the night wore on, something shifted. We started to see not just the challenges, but the possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, we could do this together. In a decision that surprised both of us, we agreed to start over. We decided to get married, but this time, we'd do it our way, away from all the drama and judgment. A simple courthouse ceremony, just us and a couple of friends. It was quick, maybe a bit impulsive, but it felt right. The day we got married was nothing like I'd ever imagined. No fancy dress, no big party. Just the two of us, exchanging vows in a small, stuffy room. But when I looked into Jake's eyes, I knew it was perfect. We kept it a secret, not ready to deal with the fallout from his family, especially Mrs. Green. We needed time to adjust, to prepare for the baby, to figure out how we were going to handle everything. It was our little bubble of happiness, fragile, but ours. Jake and I were living in our little world, trying to prepare for the baby's arrival. But we both knew we couldn't keep our secret forever. The day finally came when Jake decided it was time to tell his parents. We gotta do it, Bella. They need to know about the baby, about us, he insisted one morning, a determined look on his face. I was scared, to say the least. But what about your mom? You know she's gonna flip. He took my hands in his. I'll handle Mom. You just focus on you and the baby. So, we went to his parents' house. My heart was pounding as we walked up the driveway. The door opened, and there stood Mrs. Green, looking as stern as ever. Jacob, what are you doing here? And you brought her, she said, eyeing me with disdain. Mom, we've got something to tell you. It's important. Jake said, stepping in front of me slightly. She let us in, the curiosity clear on her face. We all sat down, the tension thick in the air. Jake took a deep breath and began. Mom, Dad, Bella, and I got married a few months back. And we're expecting a baby. There was a moment of stunned silence before Mrs. Green erupted. Married? A baby? How could you be so irresponsible? Mom, it's not like that. We love each other. We're happy, Jake tried to explain. Happy? Look at her. She's trapped you with this child, Mrs. Green accused, pointing a finger at me. I felt my face heat up. I didn't trap anyone. This baby is a blessing, not a trap. Don't talk back to me, girl. I know your type, she snapped. Jake stood up, his face red with anger. Enough, Mom. This is my life, my wife, my child. If you can't accept that, then maybe we don't need to be part of yours. The room fell silent, Mrs. Green's face red with anger, but there was a flicker of something else, maybe fear, maybe realization. Mr. Green, who had been silent till now, put a hand on her shoulder, a silent plea. She looked at him, then back at us, her face softening just a fraction. I need time to process this. We left shortly after, the air between us heavy but hopeful. As we drove away, Jake squeezed my hand. That went better than expected. I laughed, despite everything. Yeah, if you consider World War III better than expected. But it was out now, the truth. We were married, expecting a baby, and for better or worse, his family knew. It felt like a weight had been lifted, but at the same time, a new worry had settled in. How would Mrs. Green react once the news really sunk in? Would she come around, or would she be an ever-present thorn in our side? Only time would tell, but for now, we had each other, and that was enough. As we drove home, the sun setting in the distance, I felt a sense of peace. We were together, we were strong, and no matter what came our way, we'd face it together, as a family. A few weeks had passed since the big reveal to Jake's parents. Things were quiet, almost eerily so. Then, one afternoon, Mrs. Green showed up at our door, unannounced, with a homemade cake in hand. Bella, I baked this for you. A peace offering, let's say, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I was taken aback, not sure what to make of this sudden gesture. Thanks, Mrs. Green. That's unexpected. She smiled, a bit too sweetly. Call me mother, dear. After all, we are family now. After some awkward small talk, she left, leaving the cake on the kitchen counter. I invited a friend over to share the cake. Hey, Lisa, wanna come over for some cake? It's a long story. Lisa arrived, and I cut the cake, serving us both a piece. But as fate would have it, she was on a new diet kick and refused at the last minute. You know what, I'll take it home for later. My cheat day's tomorrow. She laughed, wrapping up a big slice. I shrugged and took a bite of mine. It was delicious, almond flavor bursting in my mouth. But as the evening wore on, I started feeling odd, queasy. I chalked it up to pregnancy nausea and went to bed early. But the nausea didn't go away, it got worse. By midnight, I was violently ill, and Jake rushed me to the hospital. After what felt like endless tests and worried looks from doctors, they told us the shocking news. There was a toxic substance in my system, something commonly used in gardening to kill pests. Jake's face went white as he realized the implication. The cake, my mom. I was too weak to respond, a cold dread settling in my stomach. Had Mrs. Green really tried to harm me, to harm her own grandchild? I was kept in the hospital overnight, and by morning, I was feeling a bit better, but the emotional toll was immense. Jake was a mess, torn between worry for me and disbelief that his mother could do such a thing. We were talking on the phone about it, Jake's voice heavy with concern. We need to figure out what to do next, when suddenly the door to my room creaked open, and in walked Mrs. Green. I quickly muted the phone but didn't hang up, Jake still listening in. Bella, how are you feeling, dear? She asked, her voice dripping with faux concern. I looked at her, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. I'd been better, I said, coldly. She tooted. Such a shame about the sickness. And the baby? The baby is fine, I replied, watching her reaction closely. Her face faltered for just a moment, a flash of disappointment crossing her features. Well, that's good to hear, she said, but the words felt hollow. Then, with a smirk, she added, of course, you have no proof of what caused your little incident. I made sure of that when I threw away the rest of that cake first thing this morning. My heart raced, Jake still on the line, hearing every word. She had just admitted to it, not realizing the call was still connected. As she turned to leave, I looked down at the phone, a plan forming in my mind. Mrs. Green might think she's covered her tracks, but she was wrong. We had her confession, and now it was time to make her face the consequences. After Mrs. Green left the hospital room, I called Lisa, who thankfully hadn't eaten her piece yet. She was horrified by the news and agreed to bring the cake to the police as evidence. Then I dialed Jake again. Jake, did you hear all that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, every single word, he replied, anger seething through his tone. I can't believe she'd go this far. I'm coming back to the hospital, and we're going to the police. We've got her now, Bella. By the time Jake arrived, I had managed to steady my nerves. Together, we went to the police station, the phone recording in hand. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing grimmer with every word Mrs. Green had unwittingly spilled. They assured us they would investigate immediately. The next few days were a blur of police visits, interviews, and a growing sense of dread about what was to come. Mrs. Green was brought in for questioning, and with the evidence stacked against her, she had no choice but to confess to her horrendous act. The news of her arrest spread quickly, and suddenly, the whole town was buzzing about the scandal. Jake stayed by my side through it all, his support unwavering. I'm so sorry, Bella. I never thought she'd do something like this. I know, Jake. But we're together in this, that's what matters, I reassured him, squeezing his hand. The trial date was set quickly, given the severity of the crime. Mrs. Green faced the judge, her usual stern demeanor replaced by a look of defeat. The evidence was undeniable, and she was found guilty of attempted poisoning. The sentence was harsh, but just, given the potential consequences of her actions. As we walked out of the courtroom, Jake and I both felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was over, but at such a cost. His mother, the woman who had raised him, was now behind bars because of her own twisted actions. We decided it was time to move on, to focus on the future and the arrival of our baby. The house felt quieter, the air lighter, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. Our friends and family rallied around us, their support a constant source of comfort. One evening, as we sat on the porch, Jake wrapped his arm around me. We've been through hell, Bella, but we made it. I love you, and I can't wait to start this new chapter with our little one. I leaned into him, my head resting on his shoulder. Me too, Jake. It's going to be a fresh start for all of us. The baby kicked, as if in agreement, and we both laughed. It was a sound of pure joy, a sign that despite everything, we were going to be okay. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, I realized that justice had been served, not just in the courtroom, but in our lives too. We had been tested, pushed to our limits, but in the end, we emerged stronger, united, and ready to face whatever the future held. I'm Zoe, a 28-year-old librarian with a past that reads more like a thriller than a quiet bookworm's life. I grew up in a neighborhood that taught me more about survival than any school could. I became a state champion in lightweight boxing and martial arts, not just for trophies, but to stand my ground. They called me Riptide back then, 'cause I was calm until I wasn't, and then I swept everything away. I remember the day I met Alex. It started like any other, with me shelving books and daydreaming between the quiet aisles of the library. But as I left work that day, some wannabe tough guys decided I was an easy target. That's when Alex stepped in, all chivalry and bravado. "Hey, leave her alone," he shouted, stepping between me and them. I rolled my eyes, knowing well I could handle it, but I appreciated the gesture. The thugs laughed. "What are you gonna do about it?" one sneered. Before I knew it, fists were flying. Alex took a hit, and that's when I stepped in. My training kicked in, and within minutes, the thugs were running away, nursing more than their pride. Alex was on the ground, nursing a busted lip. "Wow, that was amazing," he exclaimed, blood and awe mixing in his voice. "I'm Alex, by the way." "Zoe," I replied, offering him a hand up. From that day, we were inseparable. His parents welcomed me with open arms, his mother always saying, "You're the daughter I never had." His father would chuckle, "Well, she's certainly the protector we never knew we needed." But not everyone was a fan. Mark, Alex's younger brother, was different. The first time I met him, he sneered at my job. "A librarian, huh?" he scoffed. "What do you do, read all day?" I shrugged. "And keep the world of knowledge safe for the likes of you." He laughed, a harsh sound. "I prefer my women with a bit more edge." I raised an eyebrow. "Trust me, I've got more edge than you can handle." We left it at that, an uneasy truce between us. But I could tell, this was just the beginning of our story, one that would challenge me in ways I never expected. I went home that night, the house quiet except for the sound of Alex cooking in the kitchen. The smell of spaghetti wafted through the air, a simple pleasure after a long day. "You wouldn't believe the day I had," I started, but he turned, a smile wiping away any fatigue. "Let me guess, another round with the encyclopedia set?" "Something like that," I laughed. We settled into our routine, a peaceful life punctuated by the echoes of my past. I didn't know then how much my old life would come crashing back into my new one, but for now, I was content. I had found a new beginning, a chance at a life I never thought I'd have. First Alex's father passed away, then his mother fell asleep and did not wake up. After the dust had settled with Alex's parents passing, we found ourselves navigating a new normal. They had left us a small, cozy house in a decent part of town, while Mark ended up with an apartment across the city. It seemed like things might calm down, but that was wishful thinking. I remember the day Mark showed up unannounced with his new wife, Lisa. She was a whirlwind of attitude and ink, her tattoos trailing down her arms like battle scars. I was in the middle of sorting through some old boxes when they barged in. "Hey, look what the cat dragged in," Mark announced with a smirk. Lisa stood behind him, chewing gum loudly, her eyes scanning the house like she owned the place. "Nice digs you got here," Lisa said, her voice dripping with a mix of admiration and disdain. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Thanks, we like it. And you are?" She laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "I'm Lisa, Mark's better half. And by better, I mean way better." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Well, Lisa, welcome to our home. Just try not to break anything, including Mark." Mark rolled his eyes. "Always the joker, huh, Zoe? But seriously, this place is way too nice for a couple of bookworms. You should see the dump we're in." Lisa chimed in. "Yeah, we were thinking, maybe we could swap, you know? You take the apartment, and we take this little paradise." Alex, who had been quiet until then, laughed. "I think we'll keep what's ours, thanks." The conversation was tense, the air thick with unspoken challenges. Lisa strutted around the house, her every move calculated to intimidate. But I wasn't one to back down. "Listen, Lisa," I started, my voice steady. "This is our home, and you're welcome as family, but don't overstep. We all got to live our own lives." She snapped her gum and stared me down. "Oh, I'm just getting started, honey. I like a challenge, and this place," she gestured around, "is going to be mine." The audacity was almost laughable. Almost. I exchanged a look with Alex, who shook his head slightly, a silent message to let it go for now. They didn't stay long after that, but the tension lingered like a bad smell. After they left, Alex and I sat down in the living room, the silence between us heavy. "Can you believe them?" I finally said, breaking the quiet. Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mark's always been a handful, but Lisa, she's something else. I can handle her, I said, more to myself than to him. I've dealt with worse. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, that encounter marked the beginning of a series of events that would test our patience and our resolve. Lisa's bold claim on our home wasn't just idle talk. It was a declaration of war, and we were right in the crosshairs. The trouble began in small, annoying ways at first. I'd wake up to find trash thrown over our fence or nasty words spray-painted on the side of the house. "Get out," they'd say, or "not welcome." It was juvenile, but it set me on edge. I had a feeling Lisa was behind it, a suspicion that was confirmed when things escalated. One morning, I found a dead bird lying on our doorstep, a twisted warning. I remember standing there, staring down at it, the anger boiling inside me. I scooped it up with a shovel, my mind racing with dark thoughts. I decided to let it slide for the moment, but then Lisa took it a step further. She came strutting into the library one afternoon, a smug look on her face. I was reshelving books, and she made a beeline straight for me. "Hey, book nerd," she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. I turned, keeping my face neutral. "Can I help you?" She smirked, her eyes glinting with malice. "Just wanted to see where the famous Zoe spends her days. Quite the boring life you've got here, huh?" I shrugged, trying to keep it cool. "It's a living." "What do you want, Lisa?" She leaned in close, her breath reeking of cigarettes. "Just a friendly visit. But let me give you a little advice. Give up the house, and all this," she gestured around, "stops." Simple as that. Before I could reply, she started knocking books off the shelves, her laughter echoing in the quiet room. I grabbed her arm, stopping her. "Enough, Lisa. Leave now, or I'll call the cops." She yanked her arm free, still smirking. "You wouldn't dare." "See you around, Zoe." I spent the next hour picking up books, my mind a whirlwind of anger and frustration. I wanted to fight back, to put her in her place, but I remembered my promise to stay calm. I couldn't let her see she got to me. That evening, I called Mark, hoping maybe he'd see reason. "Mark, your wife's out of control. She came into the library today, caused a scene. It's got to stop," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, and then he laughed. Zoe, always so dramatic. Lisa's just having a bit of fun. But I'll tell you what, you give us the house, and I'll make sure she leaves you alone." I clenched my fist, feeling the old fire rise. "That's not going to happen, Mark. Control your wife, or I'll take matters into my own hands." He scoffed. "Big words, Zoe. Just remember, you started this." We hung up, the threat hanging heavy in the air. I didn't tell Alex about the call, not wanting to worry him more than necessary. But I knew things were about to get a lot worse. It was only a matter of time before Lisa or Mark made their next move, and I had to be ready. The tension was like a thick fog, hanging over our home and seeping into every corner. I could feel it, a constant reminder that things were far from okay. It wasn't just the vandalism or the threats anymore. It was the waiting, the not knowing when or what would come next. One evening, as I walked home from the library, my nerves were on high alert. The streets were unusually quiet, the silence amplifying my anxiety. That's when I saw him, Mark, staggering down the sidewalk towards me, a bottle in one hand and a look of drunken fury on his face. "Hey, Zoe," he slurred, his words soaked in alcohol. "Thought you could ignore me, huh?" I stopped, my heart pounding. "Mark, go home. You're drunk." He sneered, taking a step closer. "This is my family's home you're living in. You don't belong here." Before I could react, he swung at me, his fist cutting through the air. Instinct took over. I dodged his blow and grabbed his arm, twisting it behind him. He yelped in pain, his knees buckling. Listen to me, Mark, I hissed, my voice low and steady. I don't want to hurt you, but I will defend myself. He struggled, trying to break free, but I held firm. You're nothing, Zoe. A nobody. With a quick movement, I pushed him to the ground, his body hitting the pavement with a thud. He lay there, whimpering, the fight gone out of him. Stay away from us, Mark, I warned, my voice cold. Next time, I won't be so gentle. I left him there, the night, swallowing his curses and threats. As I walked the rest of the way home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. It was one thing to deal with words and petty acts of vandalism, but this was different. Mark had crossed a line, and I knew it was only a matter of time before things escalated even further. Alex was waiting for me when I got home, his face etched with concern. Where have you been? I've been worried sick. I sighed, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. Ran into Mark. It got a little heated. Alex's eyes widened. What happened? Are you okay? I nodded, trying to reassure him. I'm fine. Just tired of all this, tired of being pushed around. He wrapped his arms around me, a silent promise of support. We'll figure this out, Zoe. Together. But as we stood there, clinging to each other, I couldn't shake the feeling that our troubles were far from over. I had reached my breaking point, and there was no turning back. I was ready to do whatever it took to protect our home, to protect our peace. And if that meant facing down the demons of my past, then so be it. I was no stranger to fighting, and I wasn't about to start backing down now. The days that followed were a blur of unease and whispered conversations. The incident with Mark had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. I knew I had to tell Alex everything, but part of me dreaded his reaction. Would he see me differently, knowing the full extent of the violence I was capable of? When Alex finally came home from his trip, I was a bundle of nerves. He looked tired, the lines on his face deeper than when he left. He dropped his bags and pulled me into a hug, a silent question in his embrace. Zoe, what's wrong? He asked, his voice laced with worry. You're shaking. I took a deep breath, the words tumbling out. It's Mark and Lisa. They've been terrorizing us, and it's getting worse. His brow furrowed, confusion and anger mixing in his eyes. What do you mean? What happened? I told him everything, from the dead bird to the confrontation with Mark. With each word, I saw the shock and hurt flash across his face. You've been dealing with this alone? Why didn't you tell me? Alex's voice cracked, a mix of anger and concern. I didn't want to worry you, and I thought I could handle it, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Zoe, we're in this together. You don't have to carry this burden alone. I nodded, the guilt and relief swirling inside me. I know. I'm sorry. I didn't want you to see this side of me. The side that fights, that hurts people. Alex took my hand, his grip firm. I married you for all of you, Zoe. Your strength, your courage, it's part of who you are. And I love you for it. We talked late into the night, making plans and discussing our options. But underneath the strategy and determination, there was an unspoken fear. What if it wasn't enough? What if Lisa and Mark didn't back down? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Alex on the phone, his voice low and urgent. I walked into the kitchen, catching snippets of his conversation. Can't go on like this. We need to take action, he was saying. I'll call the lawyer, see what our options are. He hung up and turned to me, a determined look on his face. We're going to fight this, Zoe. Legally, and if necessary, we'll take other precautions. But we're not letting them win. I nodded, the fighter in me rising to the surface. I'm with you, Alex. Whatever it takes. But even as we banded together, ready to defend our home, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. Confessing to Alex had lifted a weight off my shoulders, but it also made the threat more real. This was no longer a distant danger, it was at our doorstep, and we were about to face it head-on. The battle lines were drawn, and there was no turning back. The quiet life we had built was about to be tested, and I only hoped that our love and resolve would be enough to see us through. One brisk morning, as Alex and I were enjoying a rare moment of quiet, a loud knock shattered the peace. We exchanged a wary glance before I opened the door. There stood Mark and Lisa, flanked by a group of guys with a rough, gangster edge. Lisa's smug grin told me everything I needed to know. This was her latest attempt to intimidate us, to scare us into giving up our home. "Look what we brought you," Lisa taunted, gesturing to the menacing crowd behind her. I felt Alex stiffen beside me, but I kept my cool. "This isn't going to work, Lisa. You can't bully us out of our own home." That's when the unexpected happened. The apparent leader of the group, a broad-shouldered guy with a commanding presence, stepped forward and burst out laughing. It wasn't the reaction any of us were expecting, least of all me. "Zoe? Is that really you?" he exclaimed, his laughter subsiding into a wide grin. I squinted, taking in his features, a flicker of recognition igniting in my mind. "Danny? Danny Coleman?" The rest of the group looked on in confusion as Danny nodded, still grinning. "In the flesh. Can't believe it's you, Riptide." The old nickname sent a shockwave through the crowd. I saw the change in their eyes, the way their posture shifted from hostile to respectful. Lisa and Mark were visibly taken aback, the confidence draining from their faces. Danny turned to the group, his voice loud and clear. "Folks, you might not know this, but Zoe here is a legend. We grew up in the same neighborhood, saw her fights. Trust me when I say, she's not someone you want to mess with." The murmurs of acknowledgement and nods of respect were almost surreal. Here I was, facing a potentially dangerous situation, and suddenly I had an advocate in the most unexpected form, a former classmate turned gang leader. Danny addressed Lisa and Mark directly, his tone serious. "You two got it all wrong. Trying to bully Zoe out of her house? That's not going to fly, not with me here." Lisa's voice was barely a whisper, her bravado gone. "But, this is supposed to be our house. We deserve it." Danny shook his head, the finality in his motion clear. "You don't deserve anything by terrorizing people, especially not someone like Zoe." He turned back to me, his expression softening. "Look, I know we've had our differences in the past, but no one messes with you. Not on my watch." As they left, with Lisa and Mark trailing behind, a defeated duo, the neighborhood's silence returned. But it was a different kind of quiet now, one filled with newfound respect and an unexpected sense of security. I closed the door, leaning back against it, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. Alex wrapped his arms around me, a mix of shock and relief on his face. "I can't believe that just happened." I smiled, the tension finally releasing. "Neither can I. But I'm not complaining." We had faced down a threat with the most unlikely of outcomes. As I looked out the window at the retreating figures, I realized that sometimes, the past doesn't just haunt you, it comes back to lend a helping hand. And with that thought, I knew we were going to be okay. We had stood our ground, and we had won. After the standoff with Danny and his crew, things took a swift turn. The air around our little home was charged with a sense of change, a palpable shift in the winds that had been threatening our peace for so long. The first sign of this change came unexpectedly, just a few days later. I was out in the garden, tending to the roses that had started to bloom again, when I saw Lisa, her usual brashness replaced with a hunched, defeated posture. She was alone, without Mark or any of her so-called friends. She barely glanced my way as she made her way to her car, piled with boxes and bags. It was clear, she was leaving. The news spread quickly. Danny, the unexpected ally from my past, had made good on his word. He kicked Lisa out of the gang, severing her last ties to the community she'd tried to dominate. Without the backing of her tough friends, Lisa no longer felt safe or powerful in the city. Her departure was quiet, almost unnoticed, a stark contrast to the loud, defiant character she had always portrayed. Mark was next. He came by a few days after Lisa's departure, his car filled with the last of his belongings. He stopped by our house, a hesitant figure at the end of our driveway. I went out to meet him, curious about what he had to say. "Zoe," he started, avoiding my eyes. "I'm leaving too. Sold the apartment. It's time for a fresh start, somewhere far from here." His voice was soft, lacking the harsh, mocking tone I'd grown used to. I could see the toll the recent events had taken on him, the realization of his mistakes finally dawning on him. "Mark," I said, my tone neutral, "I hope you find what you're looking for. And I hope you learn from all this." He nodded, a small acknowledgement of the chaos he'd helped create. "I'm sorry, Zoe, for all the trouble. I was wrong." With that, he got into his car and drove away, leaving behind the neighborhood, the conflicts, and a trail of regrets. The street that had once felt like a battleground was quiet again, the tumultuous chapter of our lives coming to a close. Inside, Alex and I watched from the window, a sense of surreal relief washing over us. "They're gone," I said, almost in disbelief. "Just like that." Alex wrapped his arm around my shoulder, pulling me close. "It's over," he whispered. "We can start to move on now." As we looked out at the quiet street, the setting sun casting long shadows over the houses, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of fate that had led us here. The day Lisa and Mark left, the neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. It was as if the air itself was lighter, fresher, and filled with new possibilities. Alex and I found ourselves in a surreal kind of calm, the kind you only notice once the constant noise has gone. One evening, as we sat on our front porch, the last rays of the sun dipping below the horizon, I broke the comfortable silence between us. "Can you believe it's over?" I asked, my voice a mixture of wonder and relief. Alex looked over, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "Honestly, no. It feels like we've woken up from a bad dream." I chuckled, the sound more heartfelt than it had been in months. "A really bad dream. But, hey, we're awake now." With each passing day, the dark chapter of Lisa and Mark faded more into the background. Our home felt like a sanctuary again, a place filled with love and laughter, rather than tension and fear. I returned to my routine, finding solace in the simple tasks of gardening and reading, the library a haven of quiet stability. The simple pleasures of neighborhood life, once overshadowed by fear and conflict, now shone brightly. Evening walks, chats over the fence, the shared experiences of community life, they all took on a new significance. The path had been long and fraught with challenges, but we had emerged stronger, our bonds with each other and with our community deepened. The peace that now filled our home was not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding, resilience, and love. In the quiet of our home, the memories of Amy, our only daughter, echoed off the walls. She was always more firecracker than flower, pushing boundaries and testing limits. As a dentist, I've seen my share of pain, but nothing quite compares to the ache of a child pulling away. My husband, John, a seasoned cop, always had a way of smoothing things over, but even he was at a loss when Amy packed up and left with that rock musician, her teenage rebellion reaching its peak. "John, how did we get here?" I asked one evening, staring at the empty chair Amy once occupied at our dinner table. One day she's sneaking out to concerts, the next, she's gone without a trace. John sighed, his eyes heavy with the same unsaid questions. "She's always been wild, Martha. Like a storm, you can't predict or tame it. But she's still our girl." But as days turned into months, with nothing but silence from Amy, the weight of her absence grew heavier. It wasn't until a photograph landed in our mailbox that we saw her again, not in person, but in a wedding picture, looking defiantly happy next to a man with a guitar and tattoos. No invitation, no call, just a snapshot of the life she chose over us. I remember my hands shaking as I held the photo, the hurt a tangible thing between us. Look at her, John. Not even a note, just this picture. She's made her choice, hasn't she? John, ever the rock, tried to calm the storm brewing in me. Maybe she's trying to reach out in her own way, Martha. It's a start, right? But his words did little to soothe the sting of rejection. We continued on, our home feeling larger and lonelier by the day. Work was a distraction, patients and procedures filling the void left by Amy's laughter and chaos. Months had worn into a year with no word from Amy, and just when the silence seemed permanent, our computer pinged a Skype call. It was Amy, her face filling the screen, looking so different yet painfully familiar. "Mom, Dad, I need your help," she said, the edges of her voice ragged with wear. John and I exchanged a glance, the kind that speaks volumes without a word. "Amy, what's going on?" I asked, my heart hammering against my chest. She hesitated, her eyes darting away before locking back onto the screen. It's a lot. I've got a baby now, a little girl. And things, well, they aren't great. I need money, Mom, $1,000 a month." John's brow furrowed, his cop instincts on alert. "A grandkid? Amy, slow down. Why do you need the money?" She bit her lip, a nervous habit from childhood. "I just do, Dad. Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." We sat in silence, the weight of her plea hanging heavy. Finally, I nodded, my decision firm, despite the whirlwind of questions. "All right, Amy. We'll help. But please, talk to us. What's been happening?" She looked down, a tear tracing her cheek. "I can't. Not now. Just, thank you. This means everything." The call ended abruptly, leaving John and I staring at a blank screen. "What do you think, John? Did we just make a mistake?" I murmured, the doubt creeping in. He shook his head, his hand finding mine. "No, Martha. She's our daughter, and she's in trouble. It's our job to help, no questions asked." "But a grandchild, John. A whole year, and she's kept this from us. What else don't we know?" I couldn't keep the tremble from my voice. "We'll find out, love. For now, let's just be there for her. However she'll let us," he replied, his voice a steady anchor in the storm. The days that followed were a blur of bank transfers and uneasy silence. I kept busy, the clinic a welcome distraction, but every time I came home, I half expected Amy to be there, waiting with her child. But the house remained quiet, our lives suspended in a state of waiting and worry. One evening, as we sat in the living room, the air thick with unsaid fears, John broke the silence. "She'll reach out again, Martha. When she's ready." I nodded, clinging to his optimism like a lifeline. "I hope you're right. I want to hold my grandchild, to tell Amy it's going to be okay." "We will, love. We will," he assured me, though I saw the shadow of his own doubts flickering in his eyes. I whispered a silent prayer for my daughter and granddaughter, wherever they were. The plea had opened old wounds and new fears, but it had also rekindled a flame of hope. We were still a family, fractured and distant, but connected by unbreakable bonds of love and the unwavering promise to be there for each other, no matter what. It was one of those early mornings, when the cold bites at your bones, the world outside frosted and still. John and I were nestled in the warmth of our home, sipping coffee, the silence comfortable, if not a bit heavy with unspoken thoughts about Amy. That's when the sharp knock came, shattering the calm like a stone through glass. John and I exchanged a startled look, the same question in our eyes, who could it be at this hour? He stood up, moving towards the door, while I followed close behind, a knot of worry tightening in my stomach. He swung the door open and there, on our doorstep, was a sight that knocked the breath from me. Amy, thinner and more worn than I remembered, clutching a small bundle wrapped in blankets. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, met mine, and it was as if the years of silence fell away in an instant. "Amy? Oh my God, Amy!" I cried out, rushing forward to wrap her in an embrace, the cold forgotten. "Mom, Dad. I'm so sorry. Can we come in?" Her voice was a whisper, hoarse and fragile. Of course, come in." John's voice was firm, guiding her gently inside as I quickly shut the door against the cold. Once inside, Amy unwrapped the bundle, revealing a tiny, sleeping face, peaceful despite the chaos. "This is your granddaughter," she said, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down my face as I looked at the baby, so innocent and unaware of the storm she'd been born into. "She's beautiful, Amy. What's her name?" Amy hesitated, a shadow crossing her face. "Lily. Her name's Lily." John, ever the practical one, sprung into action. "You both look frozen. Martha, let's get them warmed up. I'll make some food." As I helped Amy out of her coat, the threadbare fabric and worn shoes didn't escape my notice. She was shivering, her body frail and tired. I ushered her to the living room, piling blankets around her and the baby. John brought in food, setting it before Amy, who ate with a hunger that spoke of too many missed meals. Lily, now awake, watched with wide, curious eyes, her little hand wrapped around my finger. Once Amy had eaten her fill, she looked up at us, her eyes holding a depth of pain and regret. "I need to tell you everything. It's been so bad, worse than you can imagine." John and I sat, our hearts heavy with dread and love, ready to listen. As she spoke, her voice trembled with the weight of her story, each word painting a picture of a life unraveled, of dreams turned to nightmares. When she finally finished, the room was heavy with silence. I reached out, taking her hand in mine. "Amy, we're here now. You're safe, both of you." John nodded, his face set in a determined line. "We'll take care of you. Whatever it takes." Amy broke down then, tears streaming down her face, a mix of relief and sorrow. "I'm so sorry. I was so stupid, so proud. I should have come back sooner." I pulled her into a hug, rocking her gently. "Shoo, it's okay. You're home now. We'll fix this, together." Once Amy had settled a bit, Lily sleeping soundly in a makeshift bed we'd cobbled together, she began to unravel the story we'd been missing. John and I sat across from her, our hearts heavy, bracing ourselves for what was to come. "Mom, Dad. I don't even know where to start. Everything's been a mess since the day I left with him," Amy began, her fingers twisting a loose thread on the blanket. "Just start from the beginning, sweetheart. We're here to listen," I urged gently, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Amy took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the sleeping form of Lily. "It was all good at first, you know? Exciting, even. But then, after we got married, things changed. He changed. The music gigs dried up, and he started drinking, a lot. And then..." Her voice trailed off, a shiver running through her. John leaned forward, his face a mask of concern. "And then what, Amy?" She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then he started getting angry, at everything. At me. It wasn't long before he started hitting me." A sharp gasp escaped my lips, my hand flying to my mouth. John's jaw clenched, his hands forming fists on his knees. "That bastard," he muttered under his breath. Amy continued, the words pouring out now, a floodgate opened. "I thought I could handle it, that I could make it stop. But then I got pregnant with Lily, and everything got worse. He didn't work, just drank and yelled and more. I was scared, all the time." The room felt impossibly heavy, each word a weight added to our already burdened hearts. "Why didn't you come to us, Amy? Why didn't you tell us?" I asked, my voice a mix of pain and frustration. "I was ashamed, Mom. ashamed and scared. I thought I'd made my bed and had to lie in it. But when Lily was born, I realized I couldn't let her grow up in that. That's when I called you for the money. It was the only way I could think of to keep us afloat." John stood abruptly, pacing the room. "And his parents? What role did they play in all this?" Amy's lips quivered as she spoke. "They were just as bad, in their own way. His mom, she would make me do all the housework, watch every penny. If I did anything wrong, she'd take it out on me, on Lily. They all would." I reached across, taking her hand in mine. "You're safe now, Amy. You and Lily. We'll take care of you." Amy nodded, a frail smile on her lips. "I know, Mom. That's why I came here. I knew if anyone would help us, it would be you." John nodded, his face set in a grim line. "Tell us how you managed it, Amy. We need to know everything to protect you." She took a deep breath, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. "It wasn't easy. I had to wait for the right moment. His parents were out, and he was passed out drunk, like usual. I grabbed Lily, some clothes, and whatever cash I could find. I didn't even have a car seat, just wrapped her in blankets and ran." I shuddered, imagining my daughter and granddaughter in such peril. "Oh, Amy, that's so dangerous. But you're here now, that's what matters." She continued, her eyes distant as she recounted the escape. "I hitched a ride to the nearest bus station. People must have seen the desperation in my eyes, no one asked too many questions. Each mile away from that house felt like a tiny victory." John's hand found mine under the table, a silent message of solidarity. "And no one followed you? You were sure you weren't followed?" Amy shook her head. "I was careful, Dad. I know you taught me to be observant. I made sure we weren't followed. I just couldn't stay there a moment longer, not with Lily." I stood up, moving to the stove to busy myself with making more coffee, the actions mundane but necessary to keep the tremors at bay. "You're brave, Amy. So brave. We'll make sure you never have to go back there." The day passed in a flurry of activity, securing the house, making appointments with lawyers and therapists, anything and everything to ensure Amy and Lily's safety and well-being. John was on the phone most of the day, his voice a low rumble of barely contained fury and action. As night fell, Amy sat on the living room floor, Lily crawling around her, a scene so normal yet charged with the undercurrents of their recent ordeal. "I can't thank you enough, both of you. I feel like I'm finally breathing again." John looked up from his paperwork, his gaze softening. "You're our daughter, Amy. There's nothing we wouldn't do for you and Lily." I sat down beside her, the carpet soft beneath me. "We meant it when we said forever, Amy. Forever means through the hard times too." She leaned against me, her body weary but her spirit flickering with the start of something new, hope, perhaps, or the beginning of healing. "I know, Mom. I know." As we settled in for the night, the house felt different, as if the very walls were bracing to protect its inhabitants. Amy and Lily slept in the guest room, their breaths soft and even in the quiet. John and I lay in bed, our hands clasped between us, a silent vow to face whatever came next together. The escape to safety was just the beginning, but as I drifted off to sleep, I knew we were ready for it. Ready to fight, to protect, and to heal. Our family, once broken, was mending, one day, one moment at a time. With resolve hardening in our hearts, John and I drove to the address Amy had tearfully provided. The house loomed ahead, shabby and forlorn, a stark contrast to the warm, loving home we had left. "Ready?" John asked, his voice a low rumble of contained anger. I nodded, bracing myself for what was to come. We walked up to the decrepit door and knocked firmly. Shuffling feet approached from inside, and the door creaked open to reveal Amy's husband, a picture of neglect and disdain. "We need to see Amy and the baby," John demanded, his gaze steely. The husband, with a dismissive snort, replied, "They're sleeping." "What do you want at this hour?" The blatant lie made my blood boil. "Sleeping? Don't play dumb. Amy's been with us since yesterday. She told us everything," I snapped, my voice sharp with fury. Behind him, his parents appeared, their expressions sour and defensive. "What's all this about?" "Our daughter-in-law is fine, just sleeping off her tantrums," the mother sneered, a vile attempt at nonchalance. John stepped closer, his presence imposing. "You think we're fools? Amy's safe from your abuse now. She's at our house, and she's told us everything." The trio exchanged nervous glances, the facade crumbling. "You can't prove anything," the father blustered, trying to regain some ground. Without a word, John reached into his coat and flashed his police badge. The effect was immediate. Their faces drained of color, their previous arrogance replaced by fear. "We're just a family trying to get by," the mother whimpered, her bravado gone. John's voice was cold, the anger controlled but palpable. "A family that preys on its weakest members? I don't think so. You'll be hearing from us, and from the authorities." We turned and left them there, standing in their doorway, the reality of their situation sinking in. As we drove away, the weight of what we had started hung heavy in the air. Amy, holding Lily close, met us as we walked in. Her eyes, filled with a mix of hope and fear, searched ours for answers. "They're scared now, Amy. Scared of the consequences. You and Lily are safe," John assured her, his hand resting on her shoulder. The night closed in around us, the house a sanctuary against the darkness outside. As we settled in, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. The first step had been taken, the demons confronted. And though the journey was far from over, we had faced it together, a united front against the past and whatever future might bring. Our family, once fractured, was finding its way back, one truth, one moment at a time. The morning after confronting Amy's in-laws, John and I sat at our kitchen table, a silent agreement between us. Today we would ensure justice for Amy and Lily. John, with his years of experience on the force, made calls, his tone official and stern, setting the wheels of justice in motion. "Amy, can you tell us everything again?" "The authorities will need your statement," John said as he prepared a notepad, his expression serious but encouraging. Amy nodded, a determined glint in her eyes, despite the shadows of her recent past. "Yes, I'll tell them everything. They need to know what he did, what they all did." As she recounted her story, her voice trembled but never broke. She was a portrait of courage, a stark contrast to the frightened girl who had appeared on our doorstep. "And when Lily was born, things got worse. I was isolated, controlled. I couldn't let her grow up in that." I reached over, squeezing her hand. "You're doing the right thing, Amy. They won't hurt you or Lily ever again." Hours passed, filled with calls and visits from officers and lawyers, each step a move towards accountability and protection. Finally, with Amy's statement recorded and the legal process underway, we had a moment to breathe. "Mom, Dad, will they go to jail?" Amy asked, her eyes searching ours for assurance. John nodded, his voice firm. "They're facing charges of abuse and extortion. It's a strong case, especially with your testimony. They won't be free to hurt anyone else." The relief in Amy's eyes was palpable. She hugged Lily to her, whispering words of love and safety to her daughter. The day turned to evening, and as we sat together, a sense of calm settled over the house. "I can't believe it's finally happening," Amy murmured, a small smile touching her lips. "It's only the beginning, sweetheart. But we'll be with you every step of the way," I reassured her, my heart swelling with pride for her bravery. John stood, looking out the window into the growing darkness. "They'll learn that you don't mess with family. Not without consequences." We sat in quiet solidarity, The trials of the past few days bonding us in ways we couldn't have imagined. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, there was a sense of hope, a light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. As night fell and we prepared for bed, I checked on Amy and Lily, sleeping peacefully in the guest room. The sight of them, so serene, was a balm to my weary soul. We had faced the demons, and though the scars remained, we were healing, moving forward together. As the days turned into weeks, the dark cloud that had loomed over our family started to dissipate. Amy, now officially divorced and free from the man and the in-laws who had caused her so much pain, was finding her footing again. The legal proceedings had seen her husband and his parents imprisoned for their violence and extortion, a fitting end to their reign of terror. During breakfast one morning, as we all sat together, the atmosphere was lighter, almost buoyant. "You know, I've been thinking," I began, watching Lily attempt to spoon-feed herself, "how far we've come. It's like we've stepped into the light after such a long time in the dark." Amy, with a newfound strength in her eyes, smiled. "Yeah, Mom. It's like I'm finally waking up. The divorce, the trial, it's all behind me now. I can actually look forward to the days ahead." John, always the backbone of our family, nodded in agreement. "That's right. We're all moving forward now, stronger and wiser." Lily's giggles punctuated our conversation, a reminder of the innocence and joy that had returned to our home. As the day unfolded, Amy and I found ourselves in the garden, planting new flowers, a symbolic gesture of our new beginnings. "Mom, can you believe how much Lily's grown?" Amy remarked, her hands deep in the earth. I smiled, handing her a seedling. "She's going to be as strong and beautiful as her mother, and as resilient as her grandma, too." As evening approached, John joined us outside, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. "Look at our little family, Martha. This is what life's all about." I leaned into him, my heart full of gratitude. "Yes, it is. A new beginning, a fresh start for all of us." Dinner was a lively affair, with Amy sharing her plans for the future, her voice tinged with excitement. "I'm thinking of going back to school, maybe even starting my own business. I want Lily to have a life filled with possibilities." John raised his glass, his eyes shining with pride. "To new beginnings, to family, and to justice. May we always find strength in each other." We toasted to our future, the sound of our glasses clinking a sweet symphony of hope and determination. As the night drew in, I tucked Lily into bed, watching as Amy sat beside her, a serene look on her face. I whispered a silent prayer of thanks as I turned off the light, grateful for the second chance we'd been given. As I lay next to John, his presence a constant source of comfort, I knew that our journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought us here, to this moment of peace and togetherness.